Tonight, we're exploring the hidden secrets of every Pokémon ability, their ancient origins, and the lost powers that have vanished through the ages. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine, if you will, the moment you first stepped into the tall grass of the Hoenn region. The year was 2003, and the world of Pokémon was about to undergo a fundamental transformation that would change the way we understand these creatures forever. Before this moment, a Pokémon was defined primarily by its type, its base stats, and the moves it could learn. But with the arrival of the 3rd generation, something deeper was awakened. A hidden spark within their biology was revealed, a passive force that operated beneath the surface of every battle. These were the special abilities, the innate traits that breathed life into the pixels and turned a collection of numbers into a living, breathing ecosystem. We often take these mechanics for granted today. We know that a Levitate Pokémon cannot be hit by a ground-type move, and we know that a Pokémon with Intimidate will lower its opponent's attack power just by stepping onto the field. But have you ever stopped to wonder where these powers actually come from? Why does a certain Pokémon possess a gift that others do not? Is it a result of Darwinian evolution, a biological necessity for survival in the harsh wilderness of the Kanto or Sinnoh regions? Or is there something more mystical at play, a connection to the ancient myths and the primordial deities that shaped the very earth and sea? Tonight, we are going on a journey through time and across every known region to uncover the truth behind these extraordinary traits. We will look at the humble beginnings of the ability system, back when it was a fledgling mechanic in Ruby and Sapphire, and trace its growth into the complex web of hidden powers and signature traits in the modern era. We will talk about the democratization of power, how abilities that were once the exclusive domain of legendary gods like Kyogre and Groudon eventually found their way into the hands of common, everyday Pokémon. We will explore the tragedy of the lost powers, the abilities that were stripped away from certain species, leaving them changed and perhaps a little more vulnerable than they were before. There is a profound lore hidden in the descriptions of these abilities. Some tell tales of ancient worship, like the massive Melmetal, who was once revered by humans for its miraculous ability to pull metal from thin air. Others whisper of mythological inspirations, like the twin dragons Latios and Latios, whose ability to float effortlessly above the earth is a nod to the martlets of old European heraldry, birds believed to be so pure and so restless that they never touched the ground, spending their entire lives in the embrace of the wind. But as we dive into these stories, we must also confront the mysteries that remain. Why did the ability system vanish entirely in certain eras of the Pokémon world, such as the ancient times of the Hisui region, or the modern reimagining of the Kanto journey? Was it a choice of the developers? Or is there a narrative reason why these powers were dormant during those specific chapters of history? And what of the hidden abilities, those rare and elusive traits that were first discovered in the realm of dreams? These powers represent a deeper potential, a secret code locked away within a Pokémon's DNA that can only be accessed through special encounters or the intervention of rare, powerful items. The lights dim and the world outside grows quiet. We will peel back the layers of this mechanical history. We will look at the way abilities have evolved from simple passive buffs into complex strategic tools that can turn the tide of a championship match. We will examine the strange cases of signature abilities that define a species, and the even stranger cases where those signatures were shared with the world. From the crushing weight of huge power to the protective veil of Bulletproof, every ability has a story to tell. Every trait is a window into the soul of a Pokémon, revealing how they hunt, how they defend themselves, and how they interact with the world around them. So, settle in, let the soft glow of the screen and the steady rhythm of the history of the Pokémon world guide you into a state of deep relaxation. Whether you are a veteran trainer who remembers the first time they saw a Pokémon change its form in battle, or a newcomer curious about the legends that built this universe, There is a place for you here. We are going to cover it all. The origins, the evolutions, the lore, and the secrets that have been hidden in plain sight for over 20 years. The journey is long, spanning hundreds of unique traits and thousands of years of fictional history. But we have all the time in the world. Let's begin our descent into the fascinating, silent language of Pokémon abilities. In the world of Pokémon, the jump from the second generation to the third was not just a new map, not just 100 new creatures. It was a silent revolution that reshaped the very DNA of battle itself. Before the year 2002, a Pokémon was defined almost entirely by its type, its stats, and the 4 moves it carried into combat. Its identity lived in those choices, in the raw numbers. But with the arrival of Ruby and Sapphire, something else took root, an invisible layer of personality, a secret script running beneath every encounter. That layer was the ability. Now, to understand why ability became a cornerstone of the franchise, you have to understand the hardware that made them possible. The Game Boy Color was a marvel in its time, but it operated under fierce constraints. The tiny cartridge space, the limited processing power, the color palette, each game was a carefully balanced puzzle of code. When Game Freak finished Pokémon Crystal in the year 2000, they had pushed that little handheld to its absolute limit, and they knew that to evolve the series, to give each creature a deeper sense of individuality, they would need a new engine. Enter the Game Boy Advance, a leap in graphical fidelity, memory and processing speed. It could handle complex background calculations during battles without slowing down. It could track persistent effects turn after turn, and it could generate random triggers for abilities like static or flame body. That technical headroom was the quiet enabler. Without it, abilities would have remained a design note, a wish list. So what was the initial philosophy? According to interviews and early design documents, the developers wanted to give Pokémon a personality beyond their 4 moves. Think about it. In the first 2 generations, a Pikachu and a Raichu felt distinct mostly because of stats and move pool. But within a species, every individual was a carbon copy of its peers. Same hidden values aside, abilities changed that. Suddenly, a matchup with Guts played entirely differently from one with no guard. A Swellow with Guts versus one with Keen Eye was a different tactical animal. The goal was to make each Pokémon feel like an individual, not just a collection of numbers. The term they used in development was special ability, later shortened to simply ability, and it was treated almost like a hidden trait, a natural-born quirk. The transition from Generation 2 to 3 was not seamless. The loss of backward compatibility with the Game Boy Color games was controversial, but that break allowed Game Freak to rebuild the battle system from the ground up. Abilities sat at the heart of that rebuild. They were introduced without fanfare, without a tutorial that explained their full power. Players discovered them by accident. A Wild Ralts uses Trace and suddenly copies your own ability, or a Pelipper summons Rain as soon as it enters battle. Those moments felt like magic, because they were a new layer of unpredictability and depth. The silent revolution had begun, and with that revolution came the first wave of exclusive abilities, the signature traits that defined legendary Pokémon. Kyogre brought Drizzle, a permanent rain that turned water moves into floods. Groudon brought Drought, a sun that scorched the battlefield. Rayquaza brought Airlock, cancelling all weather entirely. These were not just moves. They were world-altering effects, passive powers that changed the flow of battle before a single attack was thrown. They gave these creatures an aura of dominance. They also set a precedent. Special abilities could be signature to a species, marking them as unique. Over time, many of those signature abilities would be democratized, passed to lesser Pokémon, but initially, they were badges of legend. The early Generation 3 abilities also reflected the biology of Hoenn's native species. Cherim's flower gift made it bloom only in harsh sunlight, referencing its real-world dependence on light. Castform's Forecast transformed its appearance and type with the weather. A creature so in tune with its environment that its shape would literally shift. Slaking's Truant forced it to loaf every other turn, a humorous nod to its lazy demeanor. These abilities were more than mechanics. They were storytelling. They told you something about the creature's life, its habitat, its temperament. They were personality given form. But there was another side, to this silent revolution. Not every ability was immediately balanced. Shadow Tag, for instance, made Wobbuffet unbeatable in certain scenarios, trapping opponents and forcing them to struggle. Arena Trap did the same for Diglett and Dugtrio, leading to bans in competitive play. The developers were learning on the fly. They had introduced a powerful new system, and they would spend the next several generations refining, nerfing, and rethinking how abilities interacted. The cost of giving Pokémon a personality was that some personalities turned out to be a little too strong. As we move deeper into this history, we start to see a pattern emerging. Abilities began as a way to differentiate species, but they quickly became a way to connect mechanics to lore. The next chapter in this story, Biology as Destiny, explores how a Pokémon's ability often mirrors its real-world inspiration, or its mythical origins, an unbroken thread from code to creature that makes each encounter feel like meeting a living being, not just a dataset. But for now, take a moment to appreciate that moment, at the dawn of the third generation, when the Game Boy Advance hummed to life, and the world of Pokémon silently learned to breathe something new. The transition from Generation 2 to Generation 3 wasn't just a leap in graphics or sound. It was a fundamental shift in how a Pokémon's very identity was defined. In the world of Ruby and Sapphire, something new was born, something that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface of every species, but had never been given a name or a number. It was called at the time the Special Ability, and it would change everything. Think about the way we used to battle. In Gold and Silver, the Gyarados was terrifying because of its stats, its moves, its type. But why did it feel so intimidating? Why did some Pokémon seem to radiate a presence that made opponents hesitate before attacking? In Ruby and Sapphire, the developers took that feeling and turned it into code. They asked themselves, what if a Pokémon's biology could be hardwired into the game itself? What if the way a creature looks, moves, or behaves could give it a passive power that never needed to be activated? This is the story of the first 76 abilities, 76 unique passive effects that were introduced in Generation 3. They represent a snapshot of a design philosophy that was still finding its footing, where physical traits were translated into mathematical equations, and at the heart of this experiment lay a simple, revolutionary concept that a Pokémon could be defined not just by what it could do, but by what it simply. Let's start with the most iconic of these physical translations, Intimidate. On the surface, Intimidate is straightforward. When a Pokémon with this ability enters battle, the opponent's attack stat drops by 1 stage. But look deeper, and you'll see how biology became destiny. Which Pokémon got Intimidate? The Gyarados line, the Growlithe line, the Arcanine line, the Tauros line, the Snubbull line, and later, the Stantler line. All creatures that project strength, aggression, or fear. Gyarados, the atrocious Pokémon, with its furious glare and rampaging reputation. Arcanine, the legendary Pokémon, with its proud mane and commanding presence. Even Tauros, the wild bull that charges without hesitation. The developers didn't just assign Intimidate randomly. They looked at each creature's anatomy, lore, and behavioral traits. They asked, does this Pokémon to intimidate? And if the answer was yes, they gave it a passive power that reflected that nature without ever needing to press a button. Sturdy tells a different story. In Generation 3, Sturdy was a simple ability. It prevented one-hit knockout moves from working on the Pokémon. Moves like Fissure, Horn Drill, Sheer Cold, and Guillotine, those terrifying instant win attacks, were suddenly useless against a Pokémon with Sturdy. Which Pokémon got this ability? The Geodude line, the Magnemite line, the Onix line, the Cubone line, the Nosepass line, the Skarmory line, and many others. Almost all of them are Pokémon made of rock, steel, bone, or some other hard, resilient material. Their bodies are literally built to withstand catastrophic blows. Sturdy isn't just an ability, it's a statement of biological truth. A Geodude is a living boulder. Of course it won't be shattered by a single lucky hit. A Skarmory is armoured in blades. Its structural integrity is beyond the reach of a desperate gamble. In translating these physical traits into code, the designs created a world where every ability felt like an extension of the Pokémon's own body. But the first 76 abilities weren't just about translation, they were about discovery. When players first opened Ruby and Sapphire, they had no idea what abilities existed. There was no in-game manual. You had to catch a Pokémon, look at its summary screen, and see the words intimidate or sturdy appear. Then you had to experiment to figure out what they did. Some were obvious: static, flame body, poison point. They all had a chance to inflict a status condition when the Pokémon was hit by a contact move. Others were mysterious. What did Limber do? Or Oblivious? Or Insomnia? Each one was a puzzle piece that fit into the larger picture of a Pokémon's identity. And as the community slowly mapped these abilities, a new layer of strategy emerged. This was the advent of passive power. Before Generation 3, the only passive benefits came from held items, leftovers recovery, berry effects, choice band boosts, but abilities changed the game overnight. Suddenly, a Pokémon could have a permanent, always active advantage that didn't cost a move slot, didn't require an item, and couldn't be removed. The competitive landscape was reshaped in an instant. A Pokémon with Intimidate could switch in and immediately weaken a physical attacker, forcing opponents to rethink their sweeps. A Pokémon with Sturdy could ignore the most dangerous OKO moves, making it a reliable answer to otherwise risky strategies, and the effect rippled outward. Ability-based weather setters like Drizzle and Drought, though only one each in Generation 3 on Kyogre and Groudon, created entire team archetypes around permanent rain or sun. These were not just passive effects. They were destiny-defining traits that forced the entire metagame to adapt. And yet, the first 76 abilities were just the beginning. They were the foundation upon which everything else would be built. Designers realized that by giving each species a unique or semi-unique passive, they could make even the weakest Pokémon feel special. A Sableye might have terrible stats, but its ability Keen Eye prevented its accuracy from being lowered, a small but flavorful nod to its jewel-like eyes. A Mawile might be frail, but its ability Hyper Cutter prevented its attack from being lowered, representing its powerful, unbreakable jaws. These abilities didn't just add mechanical depth, they added narrative depth. They told the story of what a Pokémon was supposed to be, even if its stats couldn't always deliver. But there was also a growing tension. Some abilities felt like they belonged to a specific creature. Levitate, for example, was originally only given to a handful of Pokémon: the Ghastly line, the Coughing line, the Unown line, and later the Flygon line, the Latios and Latios line, and the Rotom line. It was a signature trait for floating, gaseous, or ghostly beings. The idea of a Pokémon that was completely immune to ground-type moves was so powerful that the developers guarded it carefully. But over time, the urge to democratize power would win out, and abilities that were once signatures would spread to other species. That story, however, belongs to another chapter. For now, let's sit with the gravity of those first 76 abilities. They were an experiment in making biology synonymous with game mechanics. They gave us Intimidate, which turned the fear a Gyarados inspires into a numeric advantage. They gave us Sturdy, which made rock-hard bodies proof against instant destruction. They gave us Drizzle and Drought, which let the legendary titans of sea and land rewrite the weather itself. And they gave us a new lens through which to see every Pokémon, not just as a collection of stats and moves, but as a living creature with passive powers woven into its very DNA. The next time you encounter a Pokémon with Intimidate, remember that it's not just a stat drop. It's 1,000 years of evolution, a predator's glare, a roar that echoes across the Hoenn region. The developers translated that into a single line of code, and that translation changed everything. But there's one ability that stands apart from all others in its lore, one that is rooted in ancient mythology, and a creature that was said to never touch the ground. That ability is Levitate, and its story is interwoven with the myth of the martlet, a wingless bird that glides through the air without ever alighting. In our next chapter, we will explore how that mythos shaped the design of Latios and Latios, and how Levitate became one of the most coveted yet restricted abilities in the entire series. That is the story of the Martlet mythos and Levitate. We closed the last chapter with the first 76 abilities, each one a translation of biology into code. But if biology is destiny, then what happens when a creature's very nature defies the ground beneath it? What happens when a Pokémon is born to never touch the earth? In the world of Hoenn, two Pokémon embody this paradox more than any other: Latios and Latios. They are not merely dragons or psychic-type legends. They are living echoes of an ancient European heraldic symbol. The martlet. In medieval coats of arms, the martlet was a bird drawn without feet, forever in flight, never alighting. It symbolized constant quest, ceaseless motion, a soul that could not be tethered. And when the designers of Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire reached into that well of myth, they gave Latios and Latios the ability that would become their signature: Levitate. But Levitate was never meant to be just another ability. It was a statement of design philosophy. From its introduction, Levitate granted complete immunity to ground-type moves and all ground-based hazards. No earthquake could touch them, no spikes could slow them, no arena trap could hold them. In a generation where the physical special split had not yet occurred, ground was a terrifyingly common attacking type, and Levitate was the ultimate escape hatch. Yet the price of that freedom was a cage of another kind. You see, Latios and Latios were not the only Pokémon to receive Levitate. The Ghastly line, the Coughing line, the Rotom line, and many others. Each one a creature that floats, drifts, or hovers. And here the designers faced a problem. If a Pokémon could levitate, why would it ever need another ability? What second option could possibly compete with total ground immunity? But more importantly, they worried about player confusion. The early generations of Pokémon games were still teaching players how abilities worked. If a Ghastly could have levitate, or say Cute Charm, a new trainer might wonder, does my Ghastly actually float? Does it touch the ground? The visual design of the sprite might not match the ability in the slot, so the decision was made. Any Pokémon that could logically levitate would have only one ability slot for that ability, no second choice, no hidden alternative. This was the sole ability rule, a restrictive choice born from a desire for clarity, and that rule shaped the entire history of Levitate. It became the most restrictive yet essential ability in the game. Restrictive because it locked whole species into a single mechanical identity. Essential because without it, those Pokémon would be grounded in the worst possible way. Imagine a Gengar that could be hit by Earthquake. Imagine a Weezing that could be trapped by a Diglett's arena trap. The ability was not just a perk, it was a lifeline woven into their very biology. Yet as generations passed, the rule began to crack. In later games, certain Levitate Pokémon were given alternative abilities, often by losing Levitate entirely. The Goofy Boy, the balloon Pokémon, saw its Levitate stripped away in Generation 7, replaced with abilities that made thematic sense, but left it vulnerable. The community reeled. Why break the rule now? Because the designers had learned that clarity could coexist with choice. They realized that players could understand that a floating Pokémon might sometimes have a different passive trait, as long as the visual identity was strong enough. But for Latios and Latios, the Martlet bond remained unbroken. Even today, their only standard ability is Levitate. They are the purest expression of that heraldic ideal, forever aloft, forever immune to the tremors of the earth. And in the lore of the Pokémon world, that makes them something ancient, something sacred. They are not just powerful. They are the living proof that some abilities are not chosen. They are inherited from myths older than the games themselves. Of course, not every ability is so bound to a single creature. Some abilities began as signatures and spread like wildfire. Some were born from weather, from war, from the very elements. And as we look ahead to the forces that shape entire battlefields, we find ourselves on the edge of a storm. The sky darkens, the rain begins to fall, and the primordial trio of weather abilities is about to make its entrance. That story, the story of how drizzle, drought, and sandstream turned the world into a weapon, is the tale of Chapter 4, Weather Wars and the Primordial Trio. But for now, let the Martlet sleep, wings folded, never touching the ground. Let the Levitate ability hold you in a quiet drift, suspended between myth and code. Sleep well and dream of endless skies. We left off in the shadow of the Eon duo, drifting on the myth of Martlets that never touched the ground. But while Levitate granted a silent immunity to a few, a far louder revolution was brewing in the bedrock of Hoenn. Not a quiet immunity, but an open declaration of war. The very skies, seas, and earth would bend to the will of three ancient beings. And this time, the ability itself was no passive trait. It was the storm, the drought, the dust storm that turned every battle into a battlefield of creation. In the earliest days of Generation 3, The concept of a signature ability was still raw, still sacred. Normal Pokémon had their quirks: Intimidate, Sturdy, maybe a flash fire here and there. But the legendaries, they demanded something more than a stat boost or a situational resistance. They demanded control over the fundamental forces of the world. And so, the generation introduced 3 abilities that did not just alter the field. They defined it: Drizzle, Drought, and Sandstream. Each one was a weather switch activated the moment the Pokémon entered battle. No items, no turns, no setup. The rain came, the sun blazed, or the sandstorm howled, and it never stopped. Not until the beast was swapped out or fainted. It was a permanent declaration of dominance, a constant reminder that these creatures were not just powerful, they were elemental. These 3 abilities were not random inventions. They were direct reflections of the lore that had been building since the first Pokémon games. Whispered of a great clash. Kyogre, the embodiment of the sea, expanded the oceans. Groudon, the continent maker, raised the land. Their eternal conflict was a cycle of expansion and contraction, a tug-of-war that shaped the very geography of Hoenn. And in the games, this was represented not by a cutscene or a text box, but by an automatic, inescapable field effect. When you faced Kyogre, the rain fell, not as a backdrop, but as a mechanic that doubled water moves, weakened fire attacks, and made thunder never miss. When you faced Groudon, the sun blazed, scorching water moves and amplifying fire to devastating extremes. The weather was not merely a visual, it was a weapon. And Sandstream, given to the towering Tyranitar in the same generation, was a softer echo of the same concept. Though Tyranitar was no primordial deity, its Sandstream still changed the environment irreversibly, hinting at the power that the true Titans wielded. But what made these abilities truly special, what set them apart from every ability that had come before, was their exclusivity. In Generation 3, no mortal Pokémon could summon permanent rain or harsh sunlight. Only Kyogre had drizzle, only Groudon had drought. Only the gods held the keys to the weather. This was the early era of signature abilities, a time when a legendary's power was so unique, so central to its identity, that the developers locked it away as a monolith. You could not breed for it. You could not find it in the wild. You had to catch the legend itself. And that legend carried a weight that no other Pokémon could bear. The Weather Wars were not just battles of tight matchups. They were clashes of cosmic significance. And the abilities themselves told that story without a single line of dialogue. Think about what that meant for the player. When you first stepped into the Cave of Origin and faced Kyogre, the rain did not start as a visual flourish. It began as part of the battle's code. The game said, "This is how the world is when Kyogre is awake. You cannot stop it. You cannot change it. You can only endure it." The same with Groudon. The sun, harsh and relentless, amplified every ember and reduced every water gun to a whisper. These encounters were designed to make you feel small, to remind you that you were not fighting a monster. You were fighting a force of nature, and the ability was the tool that sold that experience. It was not just a passive effect, it was the narrative made tangible. The story of weather abilities did not end there, of course. In later generations, these powers would trickle down to lesser creatures. Politoed would learn to call the rain, Ninetales would summon the sun. But in the beginning, in the silent revolution of Generation 3, the weather belonged only to the primordial trio, Kyogre, Groudon, and the one who stood between them, Rayquaza, whose airlock ability cancelled their weather effects entirely. That third ability, Airlock, was itself a signature, a nullifier that turned the god's greatest strength into a void. It was a chess move of ability design, a counterbalance that kept the Weather Wars from being too lopsided. And all of it was built on the simple premise that an ability could be more than a stat. It could be a declaration of existence. As Hoenn faded, and the next region waited in the wings, the concept of weather as a battle anchor had proven itself powerful, but the developers were not finished. They had only scratched the surface. The next generation, set in a land of myths and ancient legends, would take the idea of signature abilities and expand it in ways that no one expected. The quiet whispers of weather would give way to something far stranger, far more invasive. The next chapter would challenge the very notion of what an ability could be. It would introduce powers that rewrote the rules of time and space themselves. That story begins with the Sinnoh expansion. The world of Pokémon abilities had, up to this point, been shaped by the raw forces of nature. Weather that could be commanded, terrains that could be shifted, and a handful of passive traits that defined a creature's very existence. But with Generation Oi, something shifted beneath the surface. It was no longer enough to simply have an ability that worked. Abilities now had to interact with an engine that had been completely rebuilt from the ground up. The year was 2006, and the physical special split had arrived, forever changing how every move, every stat, and every passive effect would be calculated. And with that change came the single largest influx of new abilities the games had ever seen. Diamond and Pearl introduced over 60 new abilities, more than doubling the roster that had existed in Ruby and Sapphire. But quantity alone wasn't the story. What made this generation remarkable? The way these abilities began to weave themselves into the fabric of the battle system itself. Where earlier abilities had often been straightforward, boost a stat, block a status, negate an attack, the Sinnoh expansion introduced abilities that played with timing, with hidden triggers, with conditional effects that required you to think several moves ahead. The battle engine, now refined to handle physical and special moves separately, allowed abilities to target specific categories. Abilities like Motor Drive and Volt Absorb had existed before, but now they could interact with moves that were no longer lumped into one type of damage pool. But perhaps the most telling addition, the one that whispered of a forgotten history, was Iron Fist. This ability was given to Hitmonchan, a Pokémon whose entire design had always screamed boxer: the gloves, the stance, the relentless punching moves. Yet for 3 generations, Hitmonchan had been something of a tragedy. Its move pool was shallow, its stats unremarkable, and its typing left it overshadowed by other fighting types. Iron Fist was not just a buff, it was an apology, a recognition that Hitmonchan's heritage had been buried under mechanics that never quite worked. The ability boosted the power of punching moves by 20%, and suddenly moves like Sky Uppercut, Thunder Punch, and Ice Punch became far more threatening. It was as if the developers had finally listened to the lore that had always been present in the Pokédex entries. The idea that Hitmonchan could throw 100 punches in a second, that its fists were weapons of pure speed and precision. Iron Fist made that text feel real, and Hitmonchan was not the only beneficiary. Over time, Iron Fist would spread to other Pokémon, Conkeldurr, Emboar, even the strange crab-like Crabrawler. But its origin was a quiet restoration. It was a reminder that abilities could be used to correct past mistakes, to honor a creature's intended identity. The physical special split allowed moves like Focus Punch to finally scale with attack instead of special attack, and Iron Fist doubled down on that correction. For the first time, a fighting type could truly live up to its lore without being held back by the old broken system. But the expansion went beyond individual abilities. Generation 4 also introduced abilities that changed how you approached team building. Snow Warning brought permanent hail, just as Drizzle and Drought had done for Rain and Sun, and with that came a cascade of new strategies. Abilities like Ice Body let Pokémon recover HP in hail, while Snow Cloak boosted evasion. The weather wars that had begun with Kyogre and Groudon now had a third contender, and it was a quiet, freezing one. Abilities were no longer just passive bonuses. They were the foundation of entire archetypes. The physical special split also enabled abilities like Technician to shine. Before, a move like Bullet Seed might have been physical or special, depending on the generation. But now it was firmly physical, and Technician could boost its power when combined with a multi-hit move. The synergy between ability and move type became a puzzle for players to solve. a hidden layer of strategy that rewarded those who understood the mechanics. Yet for all this progress, one ability remained a paradox. It was an ability that could make a Pokémon invincible, or leave it completely exposed, depending on how you looked at it. It was an ability that had been handed to a small pink fairy, and through a series of strange distributions, would become one of the most coveted traits in the entire game. That ability was Magic Guard, and its story is one of unintended consequences and hidden power. But that is a tale for the next chapter, where we will unravel why a simple immunity to indirect damage became the linchpin of some of the most terrifying strategies ever conceived. Generation 4 gave us a massive influx of new abilities, reshaping the battlefield in ways that would echo for generations. But among all those additions, one particular ability from the previous generation quietly waited in the wings, destined to become a cornerstone of an entire playstyle. We're talking about Magic Guard, an ability that at first glance seems simple, even unremarkable, yet beneath its surface lies a paradox so elegant it would redefine what it meant to be a defensive Pokémon. The Clefable line had always been something of an oddity. Clefairy and Clefable were pure fairy types, or at the time normal types, creatures of the moon, associated with meteorites and lunar magic. They were cute, versatile, but never truly dominant. In the early generations, they were often overshadowed by bulkier walls or faster sweepers. Then came Generation 3, the Ruby and Sapphire era, and with it the introduction of abilities. For the Clefable line, that meant two options: Cute Charm, which could infatuate an opponent on contact, or a brand new ability called Magic Guard. And that second option changed everything. Let me tell you about Magic Guard. Its effect is deceptively straightforward. The Pokémon takes no damage from indirect sources. That means no damage from poison, no damage from burn, no damage from the residual effects of sandstorms or hailstorms, no damage from entry hazards like stealth rock spikes or toxic spikes, no damage from the recoil of moves like Life Orb, no damage from the trapping of a bind or wrap. In short, any source of damage that is not a direct attack from an opponent's move simply passes over the Pokémon like a gentle breeze. And this single ability turned Clefable from a niche supporter into one of the most dominant defensive forces in competitive history. Think about what that means for a moment. In a world where every Pokémon fears the chip damage of entry hazards, the slow wear of status conditions, or the self-inflicted recoil of powerful items, Clefable stands untouched. It can hold a Life Orb and never lose a single point of health to its own power boost. It can switch into a predicted Toxic or Will-O-Wisp and laugh it off while other Pokémon would be crippled. It can sit through a sandstorm or hail with complete immunity, while its teammates struggle to stay healthy. This is the indirect damage loophole, a crack in the game's logic that Clefable exploited with surgical precision. But the question that has haunted players and lore enthusiasts alike is this: why? Why does a Pokémon associated with the moon, a celestial body that controls tides, cycles, and the very rhythm of life on Earth, possess an ability that grants immunity to the world around it? What is then the connection between lunar magic and the negation of environmental harm? The answer, I believe, lies in the ancient mythologies that shape Pokémon design. Many cultures view the moon as a symbol of purity, a sphere untouched by the chaos of earthly existence. It reflects light, but is not consumed by it. It governs the tides, but remains separate from the water. In a similar fashion, Magic Guard allows Clefable to exist within the battlefield's harsh environment, without being tainted or harmed by it. The lunar Pokémon becomes an observer, a creature that touches the world, but is not touched by its wounds. There is also a deeper, almost philosophical layer to this ability. In the competitive scene, the most dangerous threats are not always the hardest hitters. Often it is the slow accumulation of damage, the gradual erosion of health, that decides matches. Stealth Rock alone can turn a 50-50 matchup into a one-sided slaughter. Toxic can cripple any non-steel Pokémon if left unchecked. Hail and Sandstorm serve as constant, silent clocks pressuring the entire team. Magic Guard negates all of that. It elevates Clefable to a position where it can ignore the natural consequences of the battle environment, becoming a timeless anchor that can outlast almost any opponent. And this redefinition of defensive playstyles is exactly why the Clefable line rose to prominence. Before Magic Guard, a bulky Pokémon had to manage its health carefully, factoring in every point of chip damage. After Magic Guard, Clefable could focus entirely on its own moves and the opponent's attacks, with no fear of the subtler, insidious forms of harm. It could run a Healing Wish set, or a Calm Mind sweeper, or a simple utility wall, all without worrying about the sandstorm that might be raging outside. The paradox is that a Pokémon immune to indirect damage becomes even more vulnerable to direct attacks, but that trade-off is more than worth it when you consider the sheer amount of passive punishment it absorbs for free. The mystery of the lunar immunity persists, however. Why was this ability granted specifically to the Clefable line? Perhaps it is a remnant of an earlier design philosophy, where abilities were tied more closely to mythological themes. Clefairy and Clefable were said to have come from the moon, and the moon, in Pokémon lore, is a place untouched by the pollution and chaos of the Earth. Magic Guard might be a reflection of that extraterrestrial origin, a protective aura that shields the Moonchild from the very world it now inhabits. Or perhaps it is simply a clever game design choice that happened to align perfectly with the competitive metagame. Sometimes, the best abilities are born from happy accidents. As the generations passed, Magic Guard was eventually shared with other Pokémon. The Alakazam line, for example, and later the Sigilyph line and others. But it is Clefable that remains the face of this ability, the original lunar paradox. And in the quiet hours of a battle, when the sandstorm rages and the opponent expects a slow death from chip damage, Clefable sits serene, untouched, patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That is the magic of Magic Guard. But even as we marvel at this lunar immunity, the landscape of abilities was about to shift once more. A new frontier was opening. One that would allow Pokémon to awaken hidden potential from a place beyond dreams, beyond the waking world, and into a space where abilities themselves could be altered forever. And that story begins with a feature that would blur the line between online connectivity and the Pokémon universe. A feature known only as the Dream World. When Game Freak released Pokémon Black and White in 2010, they introduced something that fundamentally changed how we thought about a Pokémon's potential: the hidden ability. Up until that point, a Pokémon's ability was a fixed part of its identity, locked at the moment of capture or evolution. You could breed for a different standard ability, sure, but there was no way to access the rare, almost mythical traits that existed only in the game's code. Clefable's Magic Guard had just shown us how a single ability could redefine an entire species, turning a Moon Fairy from a passive healer into a battlefield terror that ignored sandstorms, burns and poison. That was Generation 4's gift. But Generation 5, that was a revolution. It began not in the Unova region's bustling cities or its sweeping deserts, but in a place that existed between worlds, the Dream World. To understand the Dream World, you have to think about what a dream means in the context of Pokémon. Dreams are not just random neural firings. They are glimpses into an alternate reality, a subconscious landscape where a Pokémon's true nature can emerge. The Entree Forest was the physical manifestation of that idea. A mysterious, fog-shrouded woodland where you could encounter Pokémon that seemed different, almost otherworldly. These Pokémon carried abilities that no wild encounter could give you. Abilities that were hidden, dormant, waiting to be awakened. The lore of the Entree Forest is deeply psychological. It's the idea that every Pokémon, every living creature, has untapped potential locked away in its psyche. A Pikachu you caught on Route 1 might seem ordinary, but in its dreams, it could spark with Lightning Rod, redirecting electrical attacks to power itself up. A Charmander, whose standard ability is Blaze, could dream of solar power, channeling the sun's energy into devastating fire blasts. at a cost to its own health. These weren't just alternate abilities. They were reflections of a deeper self, a version of the Pokémon that could exist if it fully embraced its intrinsic nature. And that idea, that your partner might have a hidden strength you've never seen, is what made the dream world so compelling. But how did you access this dreamscape? The dream world was a website, a browser game that you could log into on your computer. Yes, a website. In 2010, Nintendo bridged the gap between the DS and the internet in a way that felt almost magical. You would sync your Pokémon Black or White cartridge using a special Wi-Fi connection, upload a sleeping Pokémon to the dream world, and then enter a lush, interactive garden. There, you could grow berries, play mini-games, and explore the Entree Forest. The forest was procedurally generated, each visit offering new paths and new encounters. And when you found a wild Pokémon sleeping in the grass, you could befriend it, and then, through another sync, transfer that Pokémon back to your DS game. This cross-platform connection was more than a technical novelty. It was a deliberate design choice to make the act of discovery feel tangible. You weren't just pressing buttons on a handheld. You were logging into a dream, meeting Pokémon that were literally dreaming of being with you. The psychological resonance is hard to overstate. The Dreamworld website turned the act of acquiring a hidden ability into a ritual, a journey into the unconscious mind of the Pokémon world. And because the Dreamworld was a limited time service, running from 2010 to 2014, the abilities it offered took on an almost legendary quality. They were time-limited, event-like, and impossible to obtain by any other means during their active period. When you finally brought a Dreamworld Pokémon into your game, its ability would appear on the summary screen with a different icon, a small dream bubble. That icon told you, this is not a normal Pokémon. This is a creature that has touched something beyond the ordinary. The hidden ability mechanic, once introduced, became a staple of the series. In later generations, you could find them in hidden grottos, through friend safaris, or by using ability patches. But in Generation 5, there was only one way, the Dream World, and that exclusivity made them feel precious. The 2010 revolution, as it's often called, wasn't just about adding new abilities to old Pokémon. It was about redefining what it meant for a Pokémon to have potential. Before, you accepted the hand you were dealt. After, you knew that somewhere, in a forest of dreams, a version of your favorite Pokémon existed with a power you'd never seen, and that knowledge changed everything. It changed how we bred, how we traded, how we hunted. It changed the competitive landscape overnight. Think about a Pokémon like Garchomp. In Generation 4, its only ability was Sand Veil, boosting evasion in a sandstorm, functional but not game-breaking. Then the Dream World introduced Rough Skin, an ability that damages any Pokémon that makes contact. Suddenly, Garchomp became a hazard, a predator that punished physical attackers just for touching it. Or consider Politoed, which from Generation 2 onward was a cute but underwhelming water type. Then Dream World gave it Drizzle, the same automatic rain ability that once belonged solely to Kyogre. Politoed became a cornerstone of rain teams, and the entire weather meta shifted. A website, a forest, and a dream. That's what made it possible. The Entree Forest's lore ties directly into this. The forest is described as a place where dreams and reality blur. The Pokémon you meet there are not the same as the ones in the wild. They have seen something you haven't. They carry memories of a world that exists only in sleep. And when you bring them into the waking world, they carry that hidden potential with them. It's a beautiful metaphor for the idea that we all have undiscovered strengths, talents we don't know we possess, until we're placed in the right environment. The Dream World was that environment, a psychological safe space where a Pokémon could show you its true self. But the Dream World also had a practical side. It bridged the gap between browser gaming and the DS, creating a seamless loop. You played mini-games to earn berries and items. You explored the forest to find Pokémon, and then you synced your progress back to the cartridge. It was one of the first major attempts by Nintendo to integrate online and offline gameplay in a meaningful way. And it worked. For 4 years, players around the world logged in daily, tending their gardens and searching for that one Pokémon with the ability they'd been dreaming of. And then in 2014, the dream world shut down. The servers went dark, and with them, the only way to obtain hidden abilities in Generation 5 vanished, but the legacy remained. Hidden abilities continued in every subsequent generation, and the concept of the dream-awakened Pokémon became part of the franchise's DNA. The dream world itself entered the realm of nostalgia, a lost feature that older players remember with a mix of fondness and melancholy. As we move forward in this story, we'll see how those hidden powers eventually became more accessible, how the exclusive became the ordinary. That process, the democratization of the divine, is what we'll explore next. For now, rest in the knowledge that every Pokémon you've ever caught might still be dreaming of a strength you've never seen. And sometimes, the most powerful abilities are the ones that wait patiently for the right moment to emerge. The dream world opened a door not only to hidden abilities, but to a quiet revolution in how power was distributed across the Pokémon world. For generations, certain weather-altering abilities had been the exclusive domain of legendaries, forces of nature given form. Kyogre's drizzle and Groudon's drought were not just abilities, they were statements of identity, woven into the lore of Hoenn as primal expressions of creation and destruction. But in Generation V, something shifted. Game Freak made a decision that, at first glance, seemed almost heretical. They gave Drizzle to a frog and Drought to a fox. Let that sink in for a moment. The same automatic rain that once signaled the awakening of the sea basin primordial now belonged to Politoed, a cheerful blue amphibian with a curl on its head. The same harsh sunlight that Groudon used to expand the continents became the tool of Ninetales, a graceful but common fox Pokémon. This was not an accident or a balancing tweak. It was a deliberate act of democratization, stripping away the exclusive grip that legendaries held on the weather and handing those reins to ordinary species. The controversy was immediate. Players who had built entire strategies around Kyogre's reign now found themselves facing a new reality. A Politoed with Drizzle could be obtained far earlier in the game, used in standard competitive play without the restrictions of legendary status, and, most jarringly, could outlast Kyogre in certain matchups. The god of the sea, once the undisputed master of the rain, now had competition from a creature that evolves by trading while holding a king's rock. The power dynamic had fundamentally changed. When a frog became more viable than the god of the sea, the entire hierarchy of weather teams was upended. But why did Game Freak do this? The answer lies in the philosophy behind hidden abilities themselves. The dream world was not just about giving Pokémon new tools. It was about breaking the old order. Legendaries, by their nature, are rare, event-restricted, and often banned from mainstream competitive formats. By granting Drizzle and Drought to non-legendary Pokémon, Game Freak opened the door to weather-based strategies for a wider player base. They acknowledged that the weather wars of Generation 3 and IV had become stale, dominated by a handful of mythic figures. The solution was to spread the weather around, to let more Pokémon participate in the atmospheric dance. This decision also deepened the lore in subtle ways. Politoed, for instance, is known as the frog Pokémon, and its cry is said to summon rain in real-world folklore. In Japanese culture, the word for frog, kairu, also means to return, and frogs have long been associated with rain and good fortune. By giving Politoed Drizzle, Game Freak tapped into that cultural resonance, making the ability feel less like a stolen power and more like a birthright. Similarly, Ninetales, with its 9 tails and mystical origins, has deep connections to fire and the sun in various mythologies. Drought suddenly seemed less like a gift from a legendary and more like an ancient secret rediscovered. The ripple effects were felt across every tier of play. Suddenly, teams built around Politoed and Kingdra became viable, while Ninetales opened up sun strategies for Pokémon like Venusaur. and Charizard. The meta evolved, and the old guard, Kyogre and Groudon, retreated to the Ubers tier, where they still ruled, but no longer with uncontested monopoly. The frog and the fox had become the new faces of weather, proof that power could be shared without diminishing its meaning. This democratization extended beyond weather abilities. Generation V saw the distribution of other formerly signature abilities like Cloud9, Huge Power, and Magic Guard to new hosts. Each redistribution carried with it a subtle lore implication, a hint that these powers were not born with their original owners, but rather discovered or awakened in certain lineages over time. The hidden abilities of the dream world became a narrative device, a way to suggest that every Pokémon carries dormant potential, waiting for the right conditions to surface. Yet the decision to give Drizzle and Drought to common species was the most visible and controversial. It forced players to reconsider what it meant for an ability to be signature. Were legendaries merely the first to harness these forces, or were they the rightful owners? By handing the keys to Politoed and Ninetales, Game Freak implied that the weather was not owned by anyone. It was a natural phenomenon that could be channeled by any sufficiently attuned creature. The divine was made common, and the hierarchy of power was flattened. As we close this chapter, think about the implications of that shift. If a frog can command the rain, what else might be sleeping within the genetic code of ordinary Pokémon? The dream world was just the beginning. Next, we will delve into the very fabric of Heredity itself, how hidden abilities are passed down, and what that tells us about the ancient lineage of every creature in the Pokédex. The answer lies in the genetics of the hidden ability, and it might change everything you thought you knew about your favorite Pokémon. The democratization of legendary weather powers was only the beginning. Once Politoed could summon rain and Ninetales could call down the sun, a deeper question emerged. How do these abilities actually pass from parent to child? The answer lies in the genetics of the hidden ability, a system that turned breeding into a science and transformed the humble Ditto into one of the most valuable Pokémon in existence. When hidden abilities first arrived through the dream world in Generation 5, players quickly realized that obtaining a Pokémon with its rare ability was only half the battle. The other half was making sure that ability carried over to the next generation. And here, Game Freak introduced a rule that felt almost biological, as if the Pokémon world had its own version of Mendelian genetics. For a female Pokémon, the chance to pass down its hidden ability to an offspring is 80%. For a male, that chance drops to 0, unless the male is paired with a Ditto, and even then, the odds are only 60%. This asymmetry is rooted in the logic of reproduction, much as game design. In the real world, the female carries the egg and contributes the majority of the cytoplasm and mitochondria, the cellular machinery that drives development. In Pokémon, the female is the genetic gatekeeper, the one who imprints her hidden potential onto her offspring. The male, by contrast, is merely a contributor of genetic material, and without a female's egg to nurture that potential, his hidden abilities are lost. Unless, of course, you introduce the one Pokémon that breaks all the rules. Ditto, the transformed Pokémon, is the universal key to genetic secrets. Its ability to reshape its cellular structure at will is not just a battle trick. It is a reproductive miracle. Ditto can breed with almost any Pokémon, regardless of gender, because it can mimic the genetic code of any partner, but there is a cost. When Ditto is involved, the inheritance rate for hidden abilities drops from 80% to 60%. Why? Because Ditto is not a natural parent. It is a copy, a facsimile, a living mirror. The imperfect reflection of the original genetic material means the hidden ability is less reliably transmitted. Breeders who wanted that perfect Drizzle Politoed had to rely on a female Poliwhirl caught in a hidden grotto or transferred from the dream world, then hope the 80% chance worked in their favour. Or they could use a Ditto and risk the 60% roll. Over dozens of eggs, that 20% difference could mean hours of hatching and releasing. And this grind is exactly why hidden abilities became the ultimate status symbol for trainers. In the early days, before the ability patch allowed any Pokémon to unlock its hidden potential, the only way to get a competitively viable Pokémon with its hidden ability was through patient breeding. A trainer who owned a Drought Ninetales or a Contrary Superior was not just lucky, they were dedicated. They had spent time in the dream world, navigated its strange forests, befriended a rare Pokémon, and then spent hours in the daycare until the perfect child hatched. The hidden ability became a badge of honor, proof that you had mastered the deepest layers of the Pokémon world. There is something almost poetic about this. The same Ditto that could transform into any Pokémon, that could be caught in the wild with ease, became the linchpin of this genetic manipulation. Its very nature, as a creature of imitation, made it the perfect tool for breeders. Yet its imperfection kept the system from becoming too easy. The 60% chance felt like a reminder that even Ditto's power had limits, that some secrets are not meant to be fully mastered. And yet, as the generations passed, the game began to offer more shortcuts. Ability capsules could change standard abilities, but not hidden ones. Then came the ability patch, a technological marvel that could unlock the dormant genetic switch within any Pokémon. The patch made hidden abilities more accessible, but it did not erase the lore behind them. The genetics of the hidden ability remains a story of inheritance, of mothers and mimics, of the fragile transmission of power from one generation to the next. But there is another kind of creation, one that does not rely on breeding at all. A power that creates something from nothing, that transforms raw material into living metal. The story of Melmetal and the alchemy of nothing is a different kind of genetic miracle, one that begins not in an egg, but in a crucible. From the genetics of the hidden ability, we move now to something far stranger. An ability that doesn't just alter damage or grant immunity, but quite literally creates matter from nothing. This is the story of Melmetal, the mythical Pokémon whose existence challenges the very foundations of physics and alchemy, and whose ability, Iron Fist, is only the surface of a deeper, more ancient power. To understand Melmetal, we must first confront the strange case of liquid metal and the ability to create matter from a void. Think of a standard Pokémon ability as a passive trait, a biological feature, a learned instinct, a supernatural gift. Intimidate lowers the opponent's attack. Levitate grants ground immunity. Drizzle summons rain. These are modifications of the world around them, not creations of something that didn't exist. But what happens when a Pokémon can produce metal from nothing? Not from ore, not from recycling, not from eating rocks. From pure nothingness, from the void inside its own body. That is the core of Melmetal's hidden legacy, a power that ancient humans worshipped long before they understood metallurgy. Liquid metal is more than an ability, it is a phenomenon. In the Pokémon world, it is the signature trait of the Melton line, the only Pokémon that can transform into this fluid state at will. Yet the ability itself in the games is not even a battle ability in the traditional sense. Meltan and Melmetal don't have an ability called Liquid Metal. Instead, Melmetal's only ability is Iron Fist, a straightforward boost to punching moves. But the lore behind Liquid Metal runs far deeper. In the anime, Meltan can turn its body into a liquid, absorbing metal objects and then reforming. In the Pokédex entries, Melmetal is said to generate metal internally from its own body, and then shape it into massive, heavy limbs. This is the creation of matter from a void, an alchemical miracle that shouldn't be possible. The ancient worship of Melmetal reflects the dawn of human metallurgy. Thousands of years ago, before humans could smelt iron or forge steel, they watched this Pokémon. They saw it produce metal from its own liquid form, a gift of transformation. They began to mimic its process, heating ore until it liquefied, then shaping it into tools. Melmetal became a god of creation, a symbol of the ability to conjure something solid from the intangible. Temples were built in its image, and rituals were performed to honor the alchemy of nothing, the transformation of emptiness into substance. This worship isn't just a mythical footnote, it is preserved in the Pokémon world's archaeology, with ancient carvings and artifacts depicting Melmetal with glowing molten limbs, pouring metal into ceremonial molds. Now, consider the connection between mythical Pokémon abilities that defy the laws of physics. Mythical Pokémon are often set apart from ordinary species by their unique powers, abilities that seem to break causality. Mew can learn any move, Celebi can travel through time, Jirachi can grant wishes, Arceus can change its type. Melmetal's power is less flashy but no less miraculous. It creates matter. In real-world physics, matter cannot be created or destroyed, only converted. Yet Melmetal does exactly that, producing metal from its own body using what appears to be a form of biological alchemy. Its Iron Fist ability, in the games, is a combat advantage. But the lore suggests that Iron Fist is merely a manifestation of its deeper, more fundamental ability. The power to shape reality at the atomic level, drawing metal from the void and channeling it into devastating punches. The strange case of liquid metal forces us to re-examine what an ability truly is. In Generation 3, abilities were introduced as passive traits. But over time they have grown to encompass everything from weather control to dimension hopping. Melmetal stands as a bridge between the mechanical and the mythical, a reminder that some abilities are not just game mechanics, but echoes of a forgotten ancient world. A world where humans looked up at a molten Pokémon and learned to forge their own destiny. And as Melmetal's liquid body cooled into history, another chapter was about to begin. A chapter where abilities were stripped away, lost to time, buried under the snow of a forgotten region. That story, the story of the era when abilities were erased from the very fabric of Hisui, is one of the most mysterious transformations the Pokémon world has ever known. For that, we must turn to the lost era of Hisui. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. You know, Melmetal's ability to create metal from nothing was so profound that ancient humans worshipped it, saw it as a gift from forces beyond their understanding. But that worship wasn't unique. All across the Pokémon world, early civilizations looked at these creatures and saw miracles they couldn't explain. Powers that seemed to come from nowhere, tied to the very essence of the Pokémon themselves. And then, thousands of years later, we wound up with a system to catalogue those powers, to label them, to assign them as traits on a digital screen. But what if, for a long time, those powers simply weren't there? What if the way we understand abilities today is an invention of a much later age? That's the haunting question at the heart of the Hisui region, the setting of Pokémon Legends. Arceus. In that game, abilities are entirely absent. No passive stat boosts, no weather-changing triggers, no immunities that shift a battle's momentum. You send out a Pokémon, and what you see is what you get. Its raw stats, its moves, its typing. No hidden layer. And that omission feels deliberate, not a technical oversight, but a narrative choice designed to plunge you into a time before the modern science of Pokémon. The official justification, whispered through the game's design and its lore, is that Pokémon in the ancient Hisui era were wilder, less specialized. They hadn't yet formed the intricate biological quirks that would later be catalogued as abilities. Or perhaps those quirks existed, but they were so raw and unpredictable that humans couldn't reliably observe or trigger them. In the Hisui region, a wild Starly might not know its keen eye. It's too busy surviving, too feral to channel that focus. A Machoke might have a latent guts, but in the chaos of a primal world, that power only flares when it's absolutely necessary, not as a constant companion. This isn't just a mechanical quirk. It reshapes how we perceive the being known as Almighty Sinnoh, the ancient name for Arceus. In modern games, Arceus' ability, Multi-Type, is a clear, calculable force. It changes his type based on the plate he holds. It's a defined power. But in the Hisui era, When humans prayed to Almighty Sinnoh, they had no concept of a specific ability. They saw a divine presence that could shift the very fabric of reality. But they couldn't reduce that miracle to a simple category. The absence of abilities in Hisui makes Arceus more mysterious, more terrifyingly infinite. Without a little box on a screen that says, multitype, the Almighty is just incomprehensible. And that same feeling extends to every Pokémon you encounter. Without abilities, battles become more about sheer power and type matchup, but also more unpredictable. You can't rely on a Levitate to cancel an earthquake. You have to treat every ground-type move as a genuine threat. That uncertainty mirrors the real danger of a world where knowledge hasn't been codified. The people of Hisui didn't have Pokédex entries listing sturdy or intimidate. They had stories. They had warnings. They had fear. So when we ask why abilities were removed from Pokémon Legends, Arceus, the answer lies in that lost era. The game isn't just a throwback to an older style of gameplay. It's an invitation to step into a mindset where Pokémon are still wild and unknown. Their powers haven't been neatly classified. Abilities, as we know them, are a product of modern research, of 1,000 years of observation and naming. In Hisui, they simply didn't exist because no one had yet named them. But that raises a sad reality. Some Pokémon, over the generations, have actually lost abilities they once had. Even in our modern timeline, certain species had powers stripped away from them, removed in later games for balance, or for reasons that feel almost cruel. There's one particular case that haunts me, a goofy boy who once floated effortlessly above the ground, immune to the tremors below, only to have that levitate torn from him in a later generation. It's a story of loss, of how even our most beloved creatures can be changed by the passing of time. And I think you'll want to hear why that tragedy happened, and what it reveals about the way Game Freak views the history of abilities themselves. But that's a story for another night, that begins with a single, devastating update, and a Pokémon that could no longer stay above the earth. The ancient Hisui region showed us a world where Pokémon abilities were stripped away entirely. A deliberate choice that made the Pokémon feel more raw, more primal, less specialized. But there is a different kind of loss, one that happened not in a distant past, but in a living generation. A loss that struck at the heart of what a Pokémon was supposed to be. It is the tragedy of the Goofy Boy. And it begins with a shadow that once floated above the ground. When Gengar was first designed, its entire identity was built around intangibility, around weightlessness, around a ghostly grace that let it drift through walls and hover above the battlefield without ever touching the earth. In Generation 3, when abilities were introduced, Gengar received Levitate, a perfect mechanical translation of that floating biology. For 2 decades, players watched their Gengar glide over earthquakes and dig attacks, immune to the very concept of ground contact. The sprite itself showed a creature that was always a few inches above the floor, always suspended, always untouchable by the solid world. Then came Generation 6, and with it a quiet but devastating change. Without any fanfare, without any lore update or Pokédex rewrite, Gengar lost Levitate. It was given Cursed Body instead. A fitting ability for a ghost, certainly, but one that destroyed the fundamental logic of the creature. Suddenly, the shadow that had floated for 20 years could be struck by the earth itself. The Goofy Boy, as fans affectionately called him, was forced to land. The fandom erupted. Not with the loud fury of a competitive scandal, but with a deeper, more wounded confusion. How could Gengar, a Pokémon made of gas and shadow, be hit by a mud slap? How could its sprite still hover above the ground, while its ability screamed that it was grounded? The disconnect between visual design and mechanical reality became a gaping wound in the fabric of Pokémon logic. And it was not just Gengar. It was a pattern, a quiet rewriting of biological traits across the Pokédex. Consider the Pokémon that float by nature, that hover in their official artwork, that are described as drifting or levitating in their Pokédex entries. Many of them once possessed Levitate, as a natural consequence of their design. But in later generations, those abilities were stripped away, replaced by something that made more sense from a competitive balance perspective, but made far less sense from a biological one. The message was clear: mechanics trumped law. Why did this happen? The official reasoning was rarely stated, but the competitive impact spoke for itself. Gengar, already a potent special attacker, was made even more dangerous when combined with Levitate. It had only one weakness to psychic types and an immunity to ground that forced opponents into limited options. When Mega Gengar arrived, with its Shadow Tag ability that trapped opponents, the combination of Levitate and trapping would have been too powerful. So Levitate was removed to create a weakness, to force a trade-off. But in doing so, the developers rewrote the very biology of the creature, and Gengar was not alone. Look at the Rotom forms, which originally all shared Levitate, because they were possessed appliances floating in the air. In Generation 5, those forms lost Levitate and gained unique abilities, a decision that made competitive sense but erased the logic of a floating toaster. Look at the Unown, the Sigilif, the Reuniclus line, all floating creatures that either lost or never received Levitate, despite their obvious design. The pattern was clear. Biological traits were being rewritten in service of game balance, and the fandom felt the loss. The mechanical fallout was profound. For 2 decades, players had built strategies around Gengar's ground immunity. They had used it to switch into earthquakes, to set up on physical attackers, to dance around the most common coverage move in the game. When that immunity vanished, entire team compositions collapsed. Gengar could no longer be a safe switch-in against Garchomp or Landorus. Its defensive utility was gutted. It became a glass cannon that could be shattered by the very element it once despised. The competitive scene mourned, adapted and moved on, but the scar remained. And yet, the tragedy is not just about numbers and win rates. It is about the soul of a Pokémon. Gengar is a prankster, a shadow that laughs as it drifts through walls. To take away its ability to float is to take away a piece of its identity. It is the same feeling you get when you see a Pidgeot that cannot see, or a Magikarp that cannot swim, or a Pokémon with an ability that contradicts its own biology. The Goofy Boy was grounded, and the fandom never truly forgave that decision. But if Gengar's loss of Levitate was a tragedy born of competitive necessity, what happens when a Pokémon's entire identity is wrapped in armor? When the ability itself becomes the definition of the creature's biology, and that ability is changed or expanded? That story, the story of Bulletproof and the armor of evolution, is one we will explore next. And so, after the tragedy of the Goofy Boy, after watching a shadow slip its levitation and crash to the ground, we turn to a different kind of defense. One that doesn't rely on avoiding the earth, but on meeting an incoming threat head-on, chest first, with an armored shell that laughs at projectiles. This is the story of Bulletproof. It is the story of a shield that was never meant to be shared, yet found its way through the strange river of evolution, into the scales of a dragon and the fur of a bear. But to understand that journey, we have to start with the seed of the idea. Literally, the Chesnaught line, from Chespin to Quilladin to the mighty armoured Chesnaught, carries a hidden ability that is almost poetic in its specificity. Bulletproof renders the Pokémon completely immune to all moves classified as ball or bomb moves. That means no Shadow Ball, no Seed Bomb, no Electro Ball, no Zap Cannon, no Aura Sphere. Even moves like Barrage, Rock Wrecker, and the infamous Focus Blast, all nullified. For a Pokémon that is already a fortress of spikes and bark, this ability turns Chesnaught into a walking bunker against a subset of attacks that often carry high power or tricky secondary effects. But here's the fascinating part. Why ball and bomb? Why not just physical attacks or special attacks? Why these specific categories? The answer lies in the game's internal classification system, a hidden taxonomy that most players never see. Since Generation 4, each move has been assigned a flag, a tiny invisible tag that determines whether it is a ball or a bomb. for the purposes of abilities like Bulletproof, as well as the move counter. No, counter uses a different flag, but Bulletproof checks for a specific property. The move's animation is a projectile that can be intercepted. The logic is mechanical, yes, but it also tells a story about the Pokémon world. In that world, Chesnaught can raise its armoured arms and simply absorb a blast of shadowy energy or a giant seed, because its body is so evolved to withstand exactly that kind of impact. It's a specialization so refined that it borders on the absurd. Until you realize that nature itself, in the Pokémon universe, has found this exact solution multiple times. This brings us to convergent evolution, the process by which unrelated species develop similar traits because they face similar pressures. In the wild, imagine a Pokémon that must survive in environments where explosive attacks or high-velocity projectiles are common. Perhaps near volcanic vents that spew rock bombs, or in forests where sentient fruits rain down seeds. The first line to develop this defense was the Chesnaught line, but the need did not stop there. Kommo-o, the scaly, battle-hardened dragon of Alola, also gained Bulletproof as its hidden ability. Think about Kommo-o, a Pokémon covered in scales that clatter like armor, that dances before battle, that uses its fists and tail with brutal precision. It already has a physical defense that rivals steel, but its vulnerability to special attacks, especially those of the ball or bomb variety, would be a glaring weakness. So evolution gave it Bulletproof. Not because it shares ancestry with Chesnaught, but because the pressure to stop those incoming projectiles was the same. The scales evolved to do the same job: intercept, absorb, nullify. But the most surprising recipient of Bulletproof is Ursaluna, the great mud-covered bear from the Hisui region. Ursaluna is a ground-normal type, a creature of earth and brute force, with no obvious connection to ball or bomb immunity. Yet its hidden ability, Bulletproof, suggests that this ancient bear, which once roamed the wilds of Hisui, developed a hide so thick and caked with mud that it could shrug off even the most explosive of attacks. The logic aligns with its lore. Ursaluna is said to wander through peat bogs, its body constantly coated in layers of soil and mineral deposits. That armor, crude as it may seem, functions exactly like the armored shell of Chesnaught or the clattering scales of Kommo-o. It is a case of convergent evolution in its purest form. 3 different lineages: a grass-fighting starter, a dragon-fighting legend, and an ancient bear, all arriving at the same solution because the world they inhabit throws the same dangers at them. When we step back and look at the moves that Bulletproof blocks, a pattern emerges. These are not just any projectiles. They are moves that are explicitly thrown or launched as a discrete object. Shadow Ball is a blob of ghostly energy. Aura Sphere is a wave of fighting spirit compressed into a sphere. Zap Cannon is a ball of electricity. Seed Bomb is exactly what it sounds like. The classification even includes things like Rock Wrecker, which is a giant boulder hurled with force. There is a hidden logic here. If a move's animation depicts a self-contained projectile that travels from the attacker to the target, it is a candidate for the ball or bomb flag. Moves like Hyper Beam, which is a continuous beam, are not blocked. Moves like Thunderbolt, which is a lightning bolt, are not blocked. This is the quiet architecture behind the ability. A set of rules that the game never spells out, but which govern the boundaries of this evolutionary arms race. And so, Bulletproof stands as a testament to how specialized defense can arise, not from a single ancestor, but from multiple species that face the same existential threat. The Chesnaught line holds it as a signature hidden ability, but through the lens of the Pokémon world's natural history. Kommo-o and Ursaluna are proof that evolution does not hoard its inventions, it repeats its successes when the environment demands it. As we drift toward the next chapter, we will encounter an ability that is almost the polar opposite, a trait that seems to invite disaster rather than deflect it, a curse that turns items into hindrances. But that story, the story of the Klutz and the item curse, is one that reveals just how much a Pokémon's relationship with its tools can define its entire place in the world. and that is a tale worth staying awake for just a little longer. From Chesnaught's iron-hard hide to Kommo-O's resonant scales, we've seen how abilities can evolve into armor, defenses forged over millennia. But what about the opposite? What about the Pokémon that seem cursed by their own biology, destined to trip over their own feet? Tonight, we descend into the shadow side of the ability chart, the negative abilities, the self-imposed handicaps, and the strange lore of creatures who simply cannot hold a tool. We begin with Klutz. It's an ability that, on the surface, feels like a cruel joke. A Pokémon with Klutz cannot use held items in battle. No berries, no choice specs, no leftovers, nothing. The held item is essentially dead weight, a decorative trinket that has no effect. In the games, this is a liability, but in the world of Pokémon, it carries a deeper, almost tragic implication. Why would any creature evolve to be so clumsy? The answer lies with the Bunary line. Bunary and its evolution Lopunny are the signature carriers of Klutz, and their lore reveals a fascinating evolutionary compromise. In the wild, Bunary are skittish, relying on their powerful legs to flee from danger. Their ears are large and sensitive, always twitching. But here's the twist. Bunary's body is so attuned to raw, instinctive movement that it cannot focus on holding or using objects. Their paws are designed for rapid kicks, not for gripping. The Pokédex entries hint at this. Bunary will often trip over its own ears, and Lopunny's fur is so soft that it sheds constantly, but neither entry directly states the root cause. However, combined with their ability, we can start to see a picture. Bunary are biologically incapable of using tools because their entire nervous system is wired for pure, uncontrolled agility. Holding an item would interfere with their finely tuned reflexes. It's not that they are stupid, it's that they are too fast for their own hands. This concept of a negative ability extends beyond Klutz. Consider Slow Start, the ability of Regigigas. For a full 5 turns after entering battle, Regigigas has its attack and speed halved. A legendary titan, said to have moved continents, reduced to a sluggish, weak giant for the first third of a battle. Why? The lore suggests Regigigas requires time to awaken fully. Its ancient power sleeps beneath layers of stone, and the ability simulates that awakening process. But mechanically, Slow Start is a punishment, a design choice that prevents Regigigas from being overwhelmingly dominant from turn 1. It's a form of balance, but also a hint at its mythology. Even the mightiest legends have their ritual of rousing. Then there's Defeatist, the ability of the Archeops line. When Archeops' HP drops below half, its attack and special attack are halved. The Pokédex describes Archeops as a capable flyer, but one that loses confidence easily. In battle, this manifests as a psychological crash. The Pokémon gives up when wounded. It's a fascinating blend of biology and behavior, a creature whose survival instinct turns into self-sabotage. Defeatist is one of the few abilities that literally represents a mental state, not a physical trait. But these negative abilities aren't just curiosities for lore enthusiasts. They can be strategically weaponized. Enter ability swapping. In competitive play, there are moves like skill swap and role play that allow a Pokémon to swap abilities with its opponent. Why would you want to give your opponent Klutz? Because if you can force a Pokémon that relies on held items, a choice Scarf user, to suddenly become Klutz, you effectively shut down their entire strategy. The opponent's item becomes useless and you cripple their speed control. Similarly, giving Defeatist to a tanky Pokémon can turn it into a liability as soon as it takes damage. Slow Start can be inflicted on a fast sweeper, buying you precious turns. There is even a darker application with Truant, the ability of Slaking and Durant's hidden form. Truant makes the Pokémon loaf around every other turn, doing nothing. Skill swap that onto an opponent, and you can watch them struggle to attack. In double battles, this becomes a deadly dance of timing. The point is that negative abilities are not always a weakness. They are a tool for the cunning trainer who knows how to turn misfortune into a weapon. And what of the Bunary line? Can Klutz ever be an advantage? In the main games, it's a hindrance, but in the lore, it might represent something else entirely. Perhaps klutz is an evolutionary trade-off. In exchange for raw, unthinking speed, Boonieri cannot be burdened by objects. They are pure motion, unencumbered by technology. In a world where humans give Pokémon items to boost their power, a klutz Pokémon rejects that artificial enhancement. It's a return to nature, a refusal to depend on anything but its own body. As we drift deeper into the mechanics of abilities, we begin to see patterns. Every negative ability has a story behind it, a reason for existing. They are not random punishments. They are mirrors of the Pokémon's behavior, ecology, or mythology. Next, we will explore an ability that is both a gift and a trap, one that ties directly to the foragers of the Pokémon world. The honey gatherers. How does a tiny bee create something so precious? And what does it say about the relationship between Pokémon and their environment? That secret is waiting inside the hive of Chapter 15, Honey Gather and the Ecology of Combi. So we've seen how some Pokémon are cursed with an inability to properly hold items, their biology turning tools into liabilities. But what about the opposite? What about abilities that actively seek out items, that turn a Pokémon's very nature into a magnet for treasure? That brings us to Honey Gather, a deceptively simple ability that reveals more about the ecology of its users than you might expect. Honey Gather is one of those abilities that doesn't do a single thing in battle. It's entirely an overworld utility, and that makes it precious in a different way. In the wild, when a Pokémon with Honey Gather participates in a battle, even a wild encounter, there's a chance it will pick up a piece of honey after the fight. Not during, but after, as if the Pokémon has been collecting droplets from the air or from the flowers that bloom in the wake of combat. In the games, this chance is about 10%, but in the lore, it speaks to a deeper biological compulsion. The ability was introduced in Generation 4, and it originally belonged exclusively to Combi, the tiny honeybee Pokémon. And here's where the ecology begins to unfold. Combi are worker bees in a hive, and their entire existence is dedicated to gathering nectar and producing honey. The ability reflects that real-world behavior. In the Pokémon world, Combi are said to be born from a single queen, Vespiquen, and they live only to serve her. Every drop of honey they collect is brought back to the hive. So Honey Gather isn't just a random game mechanic. It's a window into the social structure of a Pokémon species that operates like a real insect colony. But the story of Honey Gather doesn't end with Combi. In Generation 7, the ability was expanded to include 2 additional Pokémon, Ribombee, and surprisingly, Teddiursa. Ribombee makes perfect sense. It's a tiny bee-like Pokémon that collects pollen and even makes little puffs of fluff. But Ursa, a bear that gathers honey, that's where the dietary lore comes in. Teddiursa, the little bear cub, is known for its insatiable love of sweet things, especially honey. In the anime and Pokédex entries, it's described as following the scent of honey for miles, sometimes getting its paw stuck in a beehive. So giving it the Honey Gather ability isn't just a gameplay balance choice. It's a direct nod to the real-world behavior of bears who raid beehives for honey and bee larvae. In the Pokémon world, Teddiursa and its evolution Ursaring are naturally drawn to combi hives, and this ability simulates the act of scavenging leftover honey after a battle. It's a perfect example of how abilities can tie a Pokémon's behavior to its real-world counterpart, creating a layer of ecological storytelling that makes the world feel alive. Now, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Overworld utility abilities have a long history in Pokémon, starting all the way back in Generation 3. The original field ability was Pickup, which allowed a Pokémon to randomly find items after battle. It was simple, but it rewarded players for keeping a certain team member in their party. Then Generation 4 refined the concept with Honey Gather, which was more specific. It only found honey, but the mechanic was similar. Over time, the developers expanded this category to include abilities like Harvest, which lets a Pokémon sometimes reuse a berry after it's been consumed, and even abilities like Compound Eyes, which increases the chance of wild Pokémon holding items. These abilities transformed the way we interact with the world outside of battle, turning our party into a little treasure hunting squad. But the evolution didn't stop there. In later generations, we saw abilities like Pickup get rebalanced, and new ones like Steadfast and Rattled were given overworld effects that affect encounter rates. Generation 6 introduced abilities like Honeygather's cousin, Sweet Veil, which protects the team from falling asleep, but that's a battle ability. The true lineage of field abilities runs from Pickup to Honeygather to the hidden item finding abilities of Generation 8, like Steam Engine or Electric Surge, which alter the terrain or have weather effects. The design philosophy has always been to give Pokémon a purpose, even when you're not fighting, to make each creature feel like a tool in your journey. So what does Honeygather tell us about the ecology of Combi? It tells us that these tiny Pokémon are gatherers, not fighters. Their ability is their defining trait, and it's tied directly to their role in the hive. And when Teddiursa joined the club, it was a reminder that evolution in Pokémon isn't just about stats and moves. It's about creating a coherent world where bears love honey and bees make it. The ability is a story wrapped in a mechanic, and yet, for all the sweetness of Honeygather, there's another ability that turns weakness into overwhelming strength. An illusion that shatters when you see its true power. That's what we'll explore next. The ability that makes the smallest Pokémon seem like giants. The secret behind huge power and the illusion of weakness. The previous chapter left us combing through the honey-drenched meadows of Combi, watching how the tiniest workers in the world could gather not just nectar, but treasures for their trainers. That idea of a small creature with an outsized utility is a delightful trick of nature, and it sets the stage for something far more deceptive. Because tonight, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the most mathematically terrifying abilities in all of Pokémon. Huge power, and trust me, the numbers are even stranger than the myth. You see, there is a rabbit, a round blue rabbit with a curly tail and a perpetual look of innocent confusion, Azumarill. For years, before it ever had a proper name in the West, this creature was whispered about as Pickablue, a rumoured blue evolution of Pikachu, spawned from misprinted trading cards and playground tall tales. The myth clung to Azumarill like static electricity. Even after the truth came out, it was a water and fairy type, not an electric one. But here is where the story twists. That silly nickname, Pickablue, became the seed of a much deeper mystery, because the real secret of Azumarill has nothing to do with water or fairies. It has to do with a hidden multiplier hiding inside its genes. Huge power is an ability that literally doubles the Pokémon's attack stat. Doubles it. Not like a stat boost you can shrug off with a move like Swords Dance. No, this is a permanent passive doubling that makes the base attack figure written in the code a lie. For Azumarill, whose base attack starts at a modest 50, that doubling pushes it to an effective 100. That is decent but not yet scary. However, when you factor in items like the Choice Band or moves like Belly Drum, that 50 becomes 200, then 400, then absurd numbers that can one-shot legendary Pokémon. The illusion of weakness is the core of huge power. You look at a fluffy bunny and see a cuddly thing. The game sees a wrecking ball. This same mathematical trick was later given to another unassuming creature, Diggersby, a fat, dirt-covered rabbit with ears that look like shovels. If Azumarill is the cute surprise, Diggersby is the ugly brute no one expects. Its base attack is 56, even lower than Azumarill's. But thanks to huge power, Diggersby's effective attack skyrockets to over 110, putting it in the same league as Garchomp and Tyranitar. And when Diggersby gets its hands on a move like Earthquake, the ground trembles for a very different reason. The design philosophy is intentional. Make them look weak, make them underestimated, then let the multiplication do the talking. That is the mathematical secret behind their deceptive strength. And it is one of the most elegant illusions in competitive battling, that the origin of huge power is not just a story of rabbits. There is another creature, a far more sinister one, that embodies this ability in a way that blurs the line between illusion and nightmare. Many of you may know the Pokémon Mawile, the steel and fairy type, with the massive jaws on the back of its head. Its appearance is unsettling, yes, but its standard form is not especially powerful. It has a base attack of 85, decent but unremarkable. Then came Mega Evolution, and with it, the ability Huge Power was bestowed upon Mawile like a curse. The fan community, in their love for this terrifying transformation, began calling it Mangle Mawile, because that is exactly what it did to opponents. Let me describe the lore of Mangle Mawile. Because the designers were not subtle, in its mega form, Mawile's jaws grow to monstrous proportions, and its body becomes a walking steel trap. The Pokédex entries from various games describe it as capable of crushing a car with a single bite, of using its second mouth to devour anything that moves. But the ability Huge Power is the real horror, with a base attack of 105 in its mega form. The doubling effect pushes it to an effective 210. That is higher than Mega Mewtwo X, higher than almost any physical attacker in existence. And Mawile has access to moves like Play Rough, Iron Head, and Sucker Punch. It can take down entire teams in a single turn, all because of a hidden multiplier that makes its stats lie. The illusion of weakness becomes a devastating reality. Why did Huge Power become one of the most feared offensive abilities? Because it rewires the way we evaluate threat. You cannot look at a base stat total anymore. You have to multiply, and that multiplication shatters the careful balance the game tries to maintain. Abilities like Huge Power and its special counterpart Pure Power are relics of an older design philosophy where some creatures were given a secret advantage that could not be seen on the surface. They are mathematical whispers that only the most dedicated trainers learn to hear. And now, as we drift deeper into the night, the next chapter will reveal another kind of partnership. One that grows from the soil and the petals of a garden you may never have fully understood. The bond between Florges and its flowers is not just beautiful, it is a symbiotic contract that changes the very nature of healing and protection. But we will get to that garden in a moment. For now, let the double power of the bunnies and the jaws settle into your mind. Tomorrow, when you look at a seemingly weak Pokémon, you will remember that numbers are not always what they seem. After the mathematical deception of Huge Power, where a seemingly weak Pokémon like Azumarill could suddenly strike with the force of a legendary, you might think that all abilities are about raw individual strength, but some of the most fascinating passive effects in the entire game are the ones that don't work unless someone else is there to benefit. They are abilities of cooperation, of selflessness, of an evolutionary strategy that prioritizes the group over the self. And no Pokémon embodies this more perfectly than the Florges line. Let's talk about Flower Veil. This ability, introduced in Generation 6, protects Grass-type allies from having their stats lowered and from being afflicted with status conditions. Read that carefully. It protects Grass-type allies, not itself unless it happens to be a Grass type. Florges itself is a pure Fairy type, so the ability is entirely altruistic. It's a shield that Florges holds over its teammates, a living canopy of petals that filters out poison, paralysis, burn, and any attempt to weaken them. This ability is almost useless in a single battle. Florges doesn't benefit from it at all, but in double battles, where a partner stands beside it, Flower Veil becomes a cornerstone of defensive synergy. The Florges line evolved in the flower fields of Kalos, where it acts as a guardian of the meadows. In the wild, Flabébé, Floette, and Florges live in a strict social hierarchy, with Florges at the top, protecting the smaller Pokémon that dwell among the blossoms. The flowers themselves are not just decorations, they are symbiotic partners. Florges tends to the gardens, and the gardens in turn produce the energy that sustains its power. Flower Veil is the mechanical expression of that bond. But there's a second ability in this line that pushes the concept even further: symbiosis. When a Pokémon with symbiosis is holding an item, and its ally uses up their own held item, the Symbiosis Pokémon will immediately pass its own item to that ally. It's the ultimate act of giving. Imagine a double battle where your partner eats a berry to restore health, and suddenly Florges hands over its own rocky helmet or life orb to keep the pressure on. This ability only triggers when a partner is present, and only when that partner consumes something. It's a reactive support that requires trust and coordination. In the lore, Symbiosis reflects how Florges shares its gathered resources with its attendants. In the games, it's one of the rare abilities that has no effect in a single battle at all. It's designed purely for cooperation. Think about how unusual that is. Most abilities are self-contained. Intimidate lowers the opponent's attack, whether you're alone or in a crowd. Levitate gives you immunity to ground, regardless of who's next to you. But Flower Veil and Symbiosis are different. They force you to consider your partner, to build a team around them. They are abilities that only function when a partner is present. This is a very small club. Plus and minus, of course, boost stats when both are on the field together. Telepathy protects allies from your own spread moves, but that works even if your partner is an opponent in a triple battle. Actually, telepathy only works for allies, but it still requires a partner to be worth using. Friend Guard reduces damage taken by allies, but not the holder. And then there's Flower Veil and Symbiosis. These are abilities that evolved specifically for a social hierarchy, a world where some Pokémon are meant to lead and others to follow. The biology of the Florges line is fascinating. Flabébé never leaves its flower. It picks one as a seedling and carries it everywhere, drawing nourishment and protection from it. As it evolves into Floette, it begins to develop a more complex relationship with the flower, using it as a tool and a weapon. And finally, Florges becomes the garden itself. Its body is covered in large, fan-like petals, and it can create entire fields of flowers in an instant. The social hierarchy is strict. A Florges is the queen of its territory, and dozens of Floette and Flabébé serve it, bringing it nectar and defending the borders. In return, Florges uses its immense energy to keep the flowers healthy and to shield its subjects from harm. Flower Veil is that shield. Symbiosis is the sharing of resources. The abilities are not just mechanics. They are the game's way of telling you that this Pokémon is a caretaker, not a warrior. There is something deeply satisfying about building a team around these cooperative abilities. In double battles, a Florges with Symbiosis can hold a berry, wait for its partner to eat a different berry, and then pass over a second berry in the same turn. Or it can hold a power herb, and when its partner uses a 2-turn move like Solar Beam, Florges hands it over to speed up the charge. The possibilities are limited only by your creativity, and yet these abilities remain relatively obscure. They are signature to only a handful of Pokémon. Florges, of course, and then later, Comfey shares Flower Veil. Actually no, Comfey gets Tridge, not Flower Veil, and Symbiosis is shared with Oranguru, another Pokémon that thrives on supporting others. But Florges remains the crown jewel. So when you face a Florges in a double battle, you're not just fighting a fairy type with high special defense. You're facing a matriarch who has spent its entire life owning the art of nurturing its allies. It will not fight for itself. It will fight for its partner. And that is a rare and beautiful thing in the world of Pokémon abilities. But what happens when a Pokémon is so focused on its own power that it completely ignores the chaos around it? That's a very different kind of ability. One that turns a blind eye to everything except its own relentless assault. And that is exactly what we'll explore next. The Symbiosis of Florges taught us about teamwork, how certain Pokémon evolved to share their energy, to protect their partners with a veil of petals. But what about the Pokémon that don't need a partner? What about the ones that don't even seem to notice when their opponents are stacking attack boosts or setting up defensive barriers? There is a quiet, almost comical resilience in creatures that simply refuse to acknowledge the chaos unfolding around them. This is the domain of the unaware ability, and it belongs to some of the most deceptively empty-headed residents of the Pokémon world. You might know Quagsire, that perpetually vacant expression, the half-lidded eyes, the way it seems to stare through you rather than at you. On the surface, it looks like a creature that has no idea what is going on, but in battle, that obliviousness becomes an absolute fortress. Unaware allows Quagsire to completely ignore any stat changes on the opposing side. That means no matter how many sword dances a Garchomp has used, no matter how many calm minds a Latias has stacked, Quagsire feels none of it. Every hit it takes is calculated from the base stats alone, as if the opponent never bothered to power up at all. It is the ultimate defensive weapon, because it nullifies the very foundation of setup strategies. And the psychological profile of these Pokémon is fascinating. Quagsire is known in the Pokédex as being very relaxed, often bumping into rocks and not minding its surroundings. But that same nature makes it immune to intimidation. It cannot be pressured by a threat it does not perceive. Similarly, Skeledirge, the final evolution of Fuecoco, is described as a laid-back singer that sometimes falls asleep while performing. Its unaware ability, introduced in Generation 9, turns that nonchalance into a tactical advantage. Skeledirge can stand before a boosted sweeper and simply continue its song unshaken. The vacant stare is not stupidity, it is a form of selective perception. These Pokémon have evolved to filter out the noise of secondary effects, focusing only on the raw, unmodified truth of a battle. There is a mechanical connection here between a Pokémon's defensive strategy and its biology. The nervous system of a Quagsire, for instance, might process sensory input differently, ignoring the fluctuations of energy that accompany stat boosts. In the wild, this makes sense. If a rival Pokémon tries to intimidate you by flashing a boosting aura, but you cannot perceive that aura, you will not retreat, you will stand your ground. Over generations, this trait became codified into a literal immunity. The same principle applies to species like Swoobat, which also possesses Unaware as a hidden ability. Its goofy, flighty demeanor belies a mind that simply does not register the opponent's escalating power. What makes Unaware so potent is that it turns the most aggressive strategies into wasted effort. A player who spends turns setting up double team or swords dance has invested resources that essentially do nothing against an unaware user. The psychological impact on the opponent can be devastating. They watch their carefully constructed boosts fall flat as the Quagsire yawns and launches a Scald or an Earthquake, hitting just as hard as if no boosts existed. It is a check to the hyper-offensive meta, a quiet rebellion against the arms race of stat increases. But there is a deeper lore here. Unaware originally belonged exclusively to the Wooper line, expanded later to include Swoobat, Skeledirge, and a few others. It was a signature ability that spoke to the amphibious, simple life of Quagsire. As the ability spread, Game Freak encoded a theme. Creatures that are perceived as simple, even foolish, gain this power. It is as if the universe rewards them for not caring. The connection between a Pokémon's vacant stare and its mechanical immunity is thus not a coincidence, it is a thematic mirror. Yet not all Pokémon can access Unaware freely. For many, it is a hidden ability, requiring special encounter methods or items to unlock. And that brings us to a fascinating shift in how players obtain these rare abilities. In the modern games, there is a single item that can retroactively grant any Pokémon its hidden ability, bypassing the old methods of breeding or dream world events. This item is called the Ability Patch, and it has completely changed the way we think about ability collection. Next, in Chapter 19, we will explore the Ability Patch revolution, how a simple consumable item democratized access to rare powers and reshaped the competitive landscape overnight. For now, let the image of a smiling Quagsire drift into your mind. It knows nothing, and because of that, it fears nothing. That is the quiet power of being unaware of the chaos. From the blissful ignorance of Quagsire and Skeledirge, we now turn to a different kind of unawareness. The unawareness of what lies hidden in a Pokémon's genetic code. For generations, trainers accepted that some abilities were simply locked away, tantalizing but unreachable. like a secret whispered only in certain corners of the world. But then came a revolution, not with a roar, but with the quiet click of an item, the ability patch, the ability capsule, and with them, the very nature of what it means to be a Pokémon began to shift. Let us rewind to the beginning of hidden abilities. Generation 5 introduced the Dream World, an online service where players could connect their games to a web browser and send Pokémon to sleep, then wake them in a meadow of dreams. Here, one could encounter Pokémon with rare abilities that could never be found in the wild. A Torchic with speed boost, a Poliwag with drizzle. These were coveted prizes, the rewards of patience and luck. But the system was flawed. The Dream World was temporary, dependent on online connectivity, and eventually shut down. For years after, hidden abilities remained trapped in a maze of obscure encounter mechanics. Hidden grottos in Unova, board battles in Hoenn, or special event distributions that might never return. If you missed that one Wi-Fi event in 2010, you might never get a hidden ability Pokémon at all. The hunt became a lottery, and the odds were rarely in your favour. Then came the ability capsule, introduced in Generation 6. This item allowed a trainer to switch between a Pokémon's two standard abilities. If your Pokémon had Overgrow, you could change it to Chlorophyll, provided the species had both. But the capsule could not grant a hidden ability. It was a door that opened only partway, leaving the deepest secrets still locked. Players could manipulate the known, but the unknown remained untouchable. The dream of a perfect ability combination felt ever out of reach. The true revolution arrived in Generation 8 with the ability patch. Now, in an instant, a trainer could force a hidden ability onto any Pokémon of that species, regardless of how it was obtained, caught in the wild, bred in a nursery, or traded from a friend. No more hours of soft resetting for a perfect nature and ability. No more wondering if a rare event would ever repeat. The ability patch gave players total control over the genetic lottery. It was a godsend for competitive trainers, a quality of life miracle for collectors, but it also changed something fundamental about the relationship between human and Pokémon. Consider what a hidden ability represents in the lore. They are called hidden for a reason. Rare traits that only emerge under exceptional circumstances. A Dragonite with Multiscale, a Greninja with Protean, a Cinderace with Libro. These are not the norm. They are the outliers, the 1 in 1,000 individuals, born with a spark of ancient power or a mutation that skipped generations. In the wild, such abilities are often the result of a lineage that has been shaped by a harsh environment or a unique ancestral bottleneck. They are the stories written into the Pokémon's DNA, the remnants of a lost age or a forgotten trial. To simply overwrite a Pokémon's natural ability with a patch is to erase that story. And yet, that is exactly what the ability patch does. It is a technological intervention, a chemical or digital manipulation that rewrites the very protein expression of a Pokémon's cells. The item description in the games is deliberately vague. A patch that allows a Pokémon to unlock its hidden ability. But what does unlock mean? Is it unlocking a dormant gene, like flipping a switch? Or is it forcing a change that would never occur naturally? The games never tell us, but the implication is clear. We are no longer simply discovering what a Pokémon can be. We are deciding it. The ability patch represents the ultimate human intervention in Pokémon genetics. It is the final step in a long journey from accepting chance to commanding it. This raises a quiet ethical question that the games gloss over. When you use an ability patch, are you helping the Pokémon fulfill its true potential, or are you tampering with its natural state? In the real world, genetic modification is a subject of intense debate. Here, in the world of Pokémon, the answer is simpler, because the creatures themselves do not object. They adapt, they thrive, and they fight alongside their trainers. But the lore offers a subtle commentary. Many hidden abilities are described in the Pokédex as rare, mysterious, or even dangerous. For example, a Pokémon with the ability Moxie becomes more aggressive after each victory. Is it ethical to encourage that behavior artificially? Or consider a Pokémon like the legendary Zygarde, whose power constructability allows it to transform, an ability that is deeply tied to its role as an ecosystem guardian. Forcing a hidden ability onto a Pokémon that never had it might be akin to waking a sleeping dragon. Yet trainers embrace the patch. It democratizes access. No longer do you need to own every game, attend every event, or trade for rare stock. You can take your starter Pokémon from the very first route, the one you raised from a timid level 5, and give it the ability that makes it shine. It is a gesture of love, of investment, of saying, I want you to be the best version of yourself. The human desire to nurture and perfect is not inherently wrong. It is part of the bond. The ability patch simply gives us the tools to express that care more directly. This revolution is not just about items. It is about the relationship between randomness and intention. Before the patch, a hidden ability was a trophy of perseverance, a proof of dedication. After the patch, it becomes a choice. And with that choice, the hunt transforms. The sport of breeding and catching shifts from a search for the needle in a haystack to a celebration of customization. Some purists mourn the loss of the chase. They miss the thrill of a sudden encounter with a wild Pokémon that defied the odds. But most trainers welcome the freedom, the ability to step away from the slot machine and into the workshop. In this new era, the most powerful tool a trainer can possess is not a Master Ball or a rare candy. It is the ability to look at a Pokémon, understand its potential, and unlock what was always meant to be hidden. The patch is a key, but the lock was built by nature itself. And when we turn that key, we are deciding that our relationship with Pokémon is not just about discovery. It is also about creation. We have come a long way from the days of rolling dice in the dream world. Now we hold the dice in our own hands. But before we forge ahead into the next chapter, perhaps it is worth pausing to consider what we gain and what we leave behind. The world of Pokémon abilities is vast, and not all secrets are ones we can unlock with a tool. Some require a change in perspective, a shift in how the very air around us. The next hidden force we will explore is not a genetic switch, but a weather pattern, an ancient power that once defined an entire species and then slowly faded into a golden decline. That story is called Cloud9 and the Golden Decline, and it begins with a simple question. What happens when a Pokémon's ability to control the weather is taken away? The answer may change how you see even the most common of creatures. But for now, let the calm settle, and let the whispers of the wind carry you into deeper sleep. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The ability patch revolution gave us control over genetics, a tool to override nature itself. But what happens when the natural order is already a battlefield of sun and rain, hail and sand? Before trainers could patch their Pokémon's hidden potential, the skies themselves were a war zone. And at the center of that conflict stood a handful of species whose very presence could silence the storm. This is the story of Cloud9 and the forgotten translation that nearly changed everything. In the original Japanese versions of Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, there existed an ability called Gold Decline. The name was a poetic riddle, hinting at a golden age falling into decay. It belonged to only two Pokémon, the Altaria line and the Lickitung line, but when the games were localized for the West, someone decided that Gold Decline sounded too abstract, too cryptic for a simple battle mechanic, and so it became Cloud9. A name that evokes a state of blissful unawareness, a head in the clouds. And yet, the ability itself had nothing to do with happiness or ignorance. It was about weather control, pure and simple. The mistranslation created a dissonance that's persisted for over 20 years. Why would a mood-altering state clear the skies? Because Cloud9 was never about being on Cloud 9. It was about the golden decline, the moment when a civilization's peak crumbles into dust and the forces of nature reset. Altaria, the humming Pokémon, is a creature of gentle breezes and clear skies. Its fluffy wings are said to be made of cloud, and it sings in a soprano that calms the most turbulent weather. But why would a Pokémon that thrives in serene air need the power to negate all weather? The answer lies in its evolutionary line. Swablu the cotton bird is tiny and fragile. A single hailstorm could wipe out a flock, so Altaria evolved a defensive mechanism, the ability to dispel any atmospheric anomaly. It doesn't control the weather, it cancels it, returning the sky to a neutral state. That is the golden decline, a return to a baseline, a fall from the height of a storm back to equilibrium. The name originally referenced the decline of extreme conditions, the gold standard of calm, but we lost that poetry when we translated it to a happy idiom. And now we come to the odd couple of this ability. Dragonite and Lickilicky. One is a dragon of the sea, beloved for its gentle nature. The other is a tongue-laden normal type that seems more at home in a circus than a sky battle. Yet they share Cloud 9. Why? Dragonite, according to Pokédex lore, can fly around the world in 16 hours. It lives above the clouds, in a realm of constant storms. Its presence alone is said to pacify the sea and the sky. Sailors have long considered Dragonite a guardian against typhoons. That is the mechanical history. Dragonite's ability to neutralize weather wars stems from its role as a peacekeeper of the heavens. It does not destroy the storm, it makes it irrelevant. The same applies to Lickilicky, a creature whose enormous tongue can clean anything, but also, according to ancient Sinnoh texts, could lick the very atmosphere into submission. It is said that Lickilicky's saliva contains enzymes that break down static charge, preventing lightning from forming. When a Lickilicky enters a battlefield, it doesn't just clear the weather, it erases the conditions that create it. But how did two such different Pokémon end up with the same rare ability? The answer lies in the mechanical evolution of the game series. In Generation 3, Cloud 9 was a signature ability for the Altaria line and Lickitung. Yet by Generation 4, it was extended to Lickilicky as an evolution, and eventually to Dragonite in later generations through hidden ability distributions. The developers likely realized that the concept of clearing the weather fit Dragonite's lore better than any other ability, and Lickilicky, with its absurd design, became the unexpected inheritor of this power. It's a reminder that abilities are not just biological traits, they are narrative tools. Dragonite and Lickilicky share a connection to the sky's equilibrium because the designers wanted to expand the pool of weather neutralizers, giving players more options to counter the dominance of Kyogre and Groudon. That dominance was the weather wars. In competitive battling, especially during the era of Ruby and Sapphire, abilities like Drizzle and Drought could decide a match before a single move was used. Kyogre would summon endless rain, Groudon would scorch the land with eternal sun. Trainers scrambled for counters. The only way to stop them was to either change the weather yourself or to nullify it entirely. Cloud 9, along with its counterpart Airlock, became the ultimate check, but Rayquaza was a legendary often banned. Cloud 9 was the accessible answer. Altaria, Dragonite, and even Lickilicky could step onto the field and reduce the most volatile weather to nothing. The mechanical history of neutralizing the weather wars is a story of balance. Game Freak needed to ensure that no single weather condition could dominate forever, so they seeded these abilities across a handful of species, each with their own lore justification. Altaria's song, Dragonite's guardian nature, Lickilicky's bizarre biology, all converge on the same mechanical function, and yet the name still haunts us. Cloud 9 suggests a blissful state, but the original Gold Decline carried a deeper meaning. It implied that weather itself was a form of excess, a golden high that must decline for the sake of order. To be on Cloud 9 is to be happily unaware. To wield the Gold Decline is to actively restore equilibrium. The mistranslation may have made the ability more friendly, but it lost the philosophical weight. When an Altaria clears a sandstorm, it is not just removing a hazard, it is ending a golden age of chaos. When a Dragonite soars into a hurricane and the winds fade, it is not being blissful, It is being a force of decline. As we look forward to the next chapter, we will explore another ability whose name hints at a painful past. It is a power that sheds burdens, but at a cost. The story of Unburdened by the Past awaits. The previous chapter left us with the scent of ozone and the echo of Altaria's feathery song, clearing the skies of storm and sun alike. That ability, Cloud9, soothes the atmosphere, making everything equal under a blanket of calm. But what happens when the weight you need to shed is not the weather, but the very objects you carry? What happens when the only way to move faster than the wind is to let go of everything you hold on to? That is the territory we enter now, a place where spirits drift and balloons rise, where the physical world becomes a chain and speed is the reward for release. At the heart of this story is a single ability, Unburden. It is a quiet power, one that does not roar or flash. Instead, it waits. When a Pokémon holding an item loses that item, whether by consuming a berry, having it stolen, or deliberately throwing it away, its speed stat instantly doubles. It is a drastic, almost desperate boost, a sudden burst of motion that can turn a slow, drifting creature into a blur. And for a long time, this ability belonged to only one evolutionary line, the Drifloon family. Drifloon and Drifblim are ghosts. They are also balloons. Their bodies are filled with gas, and they float through the world, tethered by a thin string of instinct, tied to the earth by whatever object they carry. In the lore of the games, Drifloon is known to carry away children, a dark fable, but one that speaks to the creature's strange relationship with weight. It takes things, it holds on to them, and then perhaps it lets go. The ability Unburden mirrors this cycle perfectly. When Drifblim loses its held item, it is no longer anchored. It becomes pure motion, a ghost unshackled from the gravity of the physical realm. But why would a ghost, which is already intangible, need to lose a physical object to become faster? The answer lies in the metaphor of the balloon. A balloon filled with helium wants to rise, but it cannot if it is weighted down by a basket or a string. The balloon is not free until the weight is cut. In the same way, Drifblim's spectral form is naturally buoyant, but it chooses to carry objects, perhaps as a way to remain connected to the world of the living. When that connection is severed, the spirit is released fully. The result is speed beyond measure. Now, consider what happens when such an ability is handed to other Pokémon. In Generation 5, Unburden was no longer exclusive. It became a hidden ability for Sceptile, the forest gecko, whose blade-like leaves already promised velocity. Sceptile is a creature of seamless motion, a green blur through the canopy, but even its natural speed had limits. With Unburden, Sceptile could shed its held item, often a berry like a Ocker berry, to survive a fire move, and then accelerate to a pace that left even the fastest opponents in its wake. The image is striking. A gecko that eats its own protection, then vanishes into the treetops, leaving only the rustle of leaves behind. And then there is Axelgor. This Pokémon is a runner from the start, one of the fastest in its tier, but its lore is heavy with sacrifice. Axelgor evolved from Shelmet by shedding its shell, trading armor for raw velocity. In the anime and Pokédex, Axelgor is said to be so light and so aerodynamic that it can outrun most threats. Yet even it needed something more. When given Unburden as a hidden ability, Axelgor became a force of nature, capable of outpacing nearly every creature in the game after consuming a berry or using a fling. The shell is gone, but even the memory of that weight must be released. The item is the last vestige of defense, and once it is discarded, nothing holds the runner back. There is a deep thematic thread here, connecting ghosts, balloons, and the weight of the physical world. Ghosts are traditionally seen as beings trapped between life and death, often carrying regrets or unfinished business. That business becomes a weight. In Drifblim's case, the weight is literal, a held item, and letting it go is a form of moving on. Balloons, too, are metaphors for joy and freedom, but only if they are not tied down. The child who loses a balloon watches it soar. The balloon becomes its true self only when released, and the physical world, with its objects and possessions, is often what keeps us from our fullest potential. Unburden is the ability that says, you cannot run until you drop everything. This idea of releasing the past is not exclusive to Drifblim and its later inheritors. It echoes through other mechanics in the Pokémon world, but perhaps none so directly as the simple act of losing an item. The trigger is not a stat boost from a held berry or a power boosting item. It is the absence of that item itself. The speed comes from emptiness. And emptiness, in the context of ghosts and balloons, is the space where true motion begins. Think about Drifblim floating over a quiet town at dusk. It carries a small toy in its string, perhaps a child's lost balloon. The ghost does not want the toy, it wants the connection. But when that toy is removed, either by battle or by choice, Drifblim does not sink. It rockets upward, faster than any flying Pokémon of its size has a right to go. It becomes a streak of purple and white, a fleeting shadow against the stars. That is the power of Unburden. A burst of liberation that changes the creature's entire existence in a single, weightless moment. And yet, for all its elegance, Unburden remains a rarely seen ability outside of competitive circles. Sceptile and Axelgore both prefer other hidden abilities in certain formats, but when they embrace Unburden, they embrace a philosophy of release. They become symbols of what happens when you let go of the things that hold you back. It is a quiet lesson hidden inside a game about creatures and battles. Sometimes the fastest way forward is to drop everything, but abilities are not always so poetic. Some have lost their meaning over generations, their names forgotten or their mechanics misunderstood. The story we have followed tonight, from Cloud9 to Unburden, shows how abilities carry stories in their very design. Yet before these abilities were standardized and given their current names, there was a time when they were simply a vague term that covered everything from levitate to intimidate. The mystery of that standardization is a chapter in itself, one that looks at how the language of power evolved from vague descriptors to precise mechanical labels. That is a tale for another quiet moment as we drift toward the next topic, the mystery of the special ability standard and why the words we use to describe power matter more than we realize. For now, let the image of a ghost releasing its last earthly tie settle into your mind, and let that release carry you deeper into the night. We ended the last chapter watching Drifblim drift away, its unburdened speed unlocked only when it lost something precious. That idea, a Pokémon's power tied to what it carries or what it lacks, leads us to a much quieter mystery, one hidden in plain sight across every cartridge since the year 2003. It's the mystery of a single word, ability. But here's the strange thing. When Ruby and Sapphire first arrived, that word wasn't capitalized. It wasn't even consistent. Open the summary screen of a Gen 3 game and you'll see something like ability, overgrow, lowercase a, or sometimes in battle menus you'd see that abbreviations. Ability haunted early competitive players like a ghost. What exactly was a special ability? Was it a special kind of stat, a hidden power tied to special attack or special defense? The confusion was real, and it lasted longer than you might think. The games took 5 generations to settle on the capitalized word ability. 5 generations. That's almost a decade of inconsistent text strings, localizations and shifting UI conventions. To understand why, we need to track the evolution of that single label from the Hoenn region all the way to Paldea. In Ruby and Sapphire, the feature was brand new. The developers at Game Freak had to decide how to present it. In Japanese, the term was tokusei, meaning characteristic or special nature. The English localization team initially rendered it as special ability, but the space and the lowercase letter made it feel like a description rather than a proper game mechanic. In the Pokémon summary screen, you'd see a line that read simply, ability, with no capitalization, as if it were just another attribute like height or weight. Meanwhile, in battle, the text would flash, ability, during certain triggers, like when a Pokémon's ability activated. That abbreviation, ability, was ambiguous. Competitive players who were just learning the new system would ask each other, does mean special as in special attack, or is it shorthand for special ability as a category? The lack of a standard led to early misplays. Someone might assume a Pokemon's ability only worked under special conditions, or that it was somehow tied to a hidden stat. Generation 4, Diamond and Pearl did little to clarify. The summary screen still showed a lowercase ability. The battle text remained sp ability. It was as if the developers were testing the waters, unsure whether the mechanic deserved its own proper noun. Then came Generation 5, Black and White. This was the turning point. The UI was completely overhauled. The summary screen now displayed ability with a capital A, bold and clear. The battle text dropped the spat, entirely simply stating ability. Finally, the feature had a name that felt official, a term you could point to and say, that's a game mechanic, not a vague description. But why did it take so long? Part of the answer lies in the transition from handheld cartridges to globalized localization. In the early 2000s, the Pokémon franchise was still standardizing its own internal terminology. Moves, items, and abilities were all treated as lowercase descriptors. It wasn't until the series matured and competitive play exploded with the advent of online trading and battling that the need for a consistent, capitalized mechanic name became obvious. The phrase "sp" ability was a relic of that earlier era, a shorthand that confused as much as it clarified. If you look at the UI changes from Ruby and Sapphire to Scarlet and Violet, you can trace a clear arc. In Gen 3, the ability was just a line of text. In Gen 4, it was still lowercase, but the ability's effect was now visible on the Pokémon status screen. In Gen 5, the capitalization arrived, and the summary page dedicated a whole section to the ability name and its description. In Gen 6, X and Y, the ability was displayed prominently on the battle screen with a colored background. Gen 7 introduced the ability icon in the battle menu, and by Gen 8, Sword and Shield, the UI had become so refined that you could instantly see your Pokémon's ability with a single button press. Scarlet and Violet took it further, integrating the ability into the Pokédex entry itself, so that even the lore text acknowledged its importance. But that early confusion had lasting consequences. Competitive players from the mid-2000s remember building strategies around a Pokémon's SP ability, only to realize that the abbreviation covered all abilities, not just a subset. It wasn't until Generation 5 that tournament rules began explicitly referencing ability as a capitalized term. The mystery of the SP ability era isn't just a trivia footnote. It's a window into how the franchise learned to name its own systems. Every time you open a summary screen in a modern game and see that bold, capitalized ability, you're seeing the end result of a long, quiet standardization. And yet, even as the UI became clearer, some abilities carried their own hidden histories. We've already seen how Cloud9 was once called Decline, a mistranslation that spoke to a lost piece of localization lore. The word ability itself went through a similar transformation. It took 5 generations to settle, but the mechanic itself never wavered. It was always there, from the Hoenn region forward, waiting for the players to understand. Now, as we look toward the distant past, we find another kind of mystery, one that predates even the concept of abilities. In the ancient Sinnoh region, long before humans understood the word ability, they worshipped a being they called the Almighty Sinnoh. That story, the rise of Arceus and the forgotten powers of creation, is a chapter that ties directly to the origins of every ability we've explored. But that's a tale for another night, one we'll step into when we open the gates to ancient Sinnoh and the almighty Arceus. And yet, for all the careful structuring and standardization that the game's imposed across 5 generations, the word ability itself is a modern convenience, a label we slap onto a phenomenon that, in the world of Pokémon, predates any game cartridge, any UI menu, any written rulebook. You see, long before the term special ability appeared in Ruby and Sapphire, long before Game Freak decided to capitalize the A, The people of ancient Sinnoh were already living with abilities every single day. They just called them something else. They called them miracles. 2,000 years before the events of Pokémon Legends. Arceus, give or take a few centuries, a civilization thrived in the region we now know as Sinnoh, and at the heart of that civilization lay a profound, almost terrifying reverence for the being they called the Almighty Sinnoh. We know that being today is Arceus, but what we often overlook is the lens through which those ancient people viewed the powers of the Pokémon around them. Did they understand that a Pichu could generate electricity innately? Or did they see that spark as a divine gift from their creator? Did they recognize that a Magikarp could flail with surprising strength? Or did they attribute that burst of energy to a blessing from the heavens? The answer, as with most ancient lore, is far more layered than a simple yes or no. The archaeological records, the murals, the ruins, the fragmented texts unearthed from the depths of Sinnoh suggest that the ancient Sinnohans did not separate a Pokémon's traits from its soul. To them, the ability to summon rain, to create fire from nothing, to float without wings, was not a mechanical function. It was an expression of the Pokémon's very essence, a reflection of the Almighty Sinnoh's original act of creation. In their worldview, every power was a fragment of the original divine pattern. When a Torkoal emitted smoke, they saw a small echo of the steam that once swirled across the primordial world. When a Machop's guts flared red with adrenaline, they saw the same raw force that had shaped the continents. But here is where the modern concept of an ability begins to blur with that ancient perspective. We, with our Generation 3 menus and our ability capsules, think of abilities as traits. Something a Pokémon can possess, switch, or lose. The ancient Sinnohans thought of them as a state of being. A Rapidash that could run across water, that wasn't an ability called Flash Fire. That was a sign that the Pokémon had been touched directly by the Creator's flame. And they were absolutely certain of one thing. The most powerful ability of all belonged to the Almighty Sinnoh itself. An ability so fundamental that it wasn't just a power. It was the mechanism by which the universe came to be. We know that ability today as multi-type. In the games, multi-type is the signature ability of Arceus, and it functions by changing Arceus's type based on the held plate or Zeg crystal. Mechanically, it's a simple adapter, but in the lore of ancient Sinnoh, multi-type was not a simple type changer. It was the ability to hold the fundamental plates of creation. Each plate represented a type, yes, but also an elemental force, a building block of reality. The legend says that Arceus used these plates to shape the world, to carve the dimensions of time and space, to breathe life into the first Pokémon. The ability to multi-type was, in essence, the ability to cycle through the very building blocks of existence. Ancient humans understood this. They might not have used the word ability, but they recognized that the Almighty Sinnoh possessed a unique, singular power that no other creature could replicate, and they recorded that recognition in the oldest of the Sinnoh tablets. One tablet, discovered in the ruins of the fabled cave, speaks of the 100 arms of the Creator, each arm holding a different element, and the whole rotating like a great wheel. That wheel, scholars now believe, was a conceptual metaphor for multi-type, the idea that Arceus could turn its nature to any point on the elemental compass. And if multi-type was the divine ability, then every lesser ability, every drizzle, every drought, every levitate, was merely a fraction of that original power, gifted to lesser Pokémon as a reminder of the creation. The ancient Sinnohans would have looked at Kyogre summoning a downpour and said, "That is a small piece of the Almighty Sinnoh's rain plate." They wouldn't have called it an ability. They would have called it a miracle. But did they truly see these powers as miracles? Or did they have a more pragmatic understanding? The evidence is contradictory. And that contradiction is exactly what makes this period so fascinating. Consider the murals in the Temple of Sinnoh. They depict humans and Pokémon working together, using their powers to build structures, to clear land, to channel water. The artwork doesn't show humans bowing in awe every time a Pokémon uses a move. Instead, it shows cooperation, familiarity. The ancient Sinnohans knew, for example, that the Geodude line could increase their physical output when hit with a ground-type move, a trait we now call Rock Head, plus some hidden mechanics, but they likely recognized that pattern. They learned that a certain kind of Pokémon would become stronger when wet, a precursor to abilities like Swift Swim. They didn't have a word for it, but they treated these behaviors as predictable, usable, even trainable. That suggests a proto-scientific understanding of abilities, not purely religious awe. Yet the same civilization also built altars to the late Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit and Azelf, believing that those Pokémon granted knowledge, emotion and willpower to humans, and those traits, those intangible gifts, are themselves a kind of ability. The ability to learn, to feel, to act. If a Pokémon can have a hidden ability like telepathy, which allows it to sense the thoughts of others, an ancient person might have equated that to a divine blessing from Uxie. So the line between miracle and trait was blurred. A child who watched a Pikachu's cheek sparkle during a thunderstorm might have grown up believing that those sparks were a direct gift from the almighty Sinnoh. But a farmer who watched his own Pikachu consistently generate sparks when frightened knew that it happened reliably. A natural, repeatable phenomenon. Both views coexisted, and both views in a way were correct. An ability is a repeatable phenomenon that is also, by Pokémon World standards, a natural expression of a creature's soul. Now, fast forward to the world of the games we play today. We have neatly categorized every one of these phenomena into a list of over 300 distinct abilities. We have ability patches to swap them, ability capsules to choose them, and hidden abilities that only appear through special means. We have stripped away the divine and replaced it with data. But if you listen closely to the lore of the ancient Sinnoh civilization, you can hear the faint echo of a time when multi-type wasn't just a game mechanic for changing types. It was the original act of creation, and every other ability, from Levitate to Unaware, was a tiny piece of that first world-shattering event, scattered across the generations like shards of a broken mirror. So the next time you see an Arceus in battle, holding a plate and shifting from type to type, remember that you are witnessing the ability that built the universe, and every other Pokémon's ability, no matter how trivial or powerful, is a descendant of that primeval power. The ancient Sinnohans understood that connection. They lived it. They worshipped it. They saw the almighty Sinnoh in the spark of a Pichu and the roar of a Groudon, and they passed that knowledge down through stone and legend until it reached us 2,000 years to a year, still trying to find the right word for it. But the story of abilities isn't just about ancient gods and lost miracles. It's also about how those same forces reappear in creatures that look nothing like their ancestors. How a Pikachu and a Deden both produce electricity, yet one is a mouse and the other is a squirrel. A phenomenon the researchers call convergent evolution, and the shared traits that emerge from that convergence are more than just physical similarities. They are echoes of the same ability, resurfacing across different evolutionary lines. That story, my friend, is one we are about to explore next, when we turn our attention to the hidden links between species that nature itself seemed to have copied and pasted. But if ancient humans saw abilities as gifts from the heavens, what are we to make of abilities that appear in creatures with absolutely no shared ancestry? How do we explain a power that seems to have been sprinkled across the evolutionary tree, like rain falling on both grass and stone, nourishing each in the same way despite their entirely different origins? This is the puzzle at the heart of Generation 6's hidden ability, Bulletproof, and the strange constellation of Pokémon that carry it. Bulletproof first appeared as the signature hidden ability of the Chespin line, specifically Chesnaught, the final form of that starter. At the time, it seemed perfectly tailored to a knight-like Pokémon whose bulky armor and shield-like arms were built for deflecting projectiles. But in later generations, Bulletproof was quietly distributed to species that had no business sharing a common ancestor with Chesnaught. The Komodo line received it, Doughblade received it, Applin received it, and even Ursaluna, the great mud-covered bear of Hisui, eventually gained access to it. These Pokémon are not close relatives. They do not share a genus, a habitat, or even a type in most cases. So what connects them? The answer lies in a concept ecologists call convergent evolution. In the natural world, unrelated organisms often develop similar traits, not because they inherited them from a common ancestor, but because they face similar environmental pressures. The wings of bats and the wings of birds are a classic example. Both allow flight, but they evolved independently from forelimbs that were never originally meant for the sky. In the Pokémon world, abilities function the same way. They are not merely genetic heirlooms passed down through bloodlines. They are responses to the world. Functional convergence describes how the environment, rather than lineage, becomes the dominant force shaping a Pokémon's most essential traits. Consider Doughblade. It is a possession of two swords, a ghost steel type that floats through ruins and ancient battlefields. Its body is metal. Its primary defense is its hardness. But what threat would a floating sword face that requires immunity to bullet and bomb moves? Think of the environments where Doughblade lingers: abandoned castles, forgotten armories, places where generations of warriors trained, where stones were hurled from catapults and arrows rained down from towers. A sword that could not withstand blunt force trauma would shatter. Over centuries, those blades that survived were the ones that developed an innate resistance to projectile attacks, a kind of spectral armor that deflected anything thrown at them. That resistance became bulletproof. Now take Applin, a tiny worm hiding inside an apple. Applin's entire survival strategy is camouflage. It fools predators into thinking it is a piece of fruit. But what happens when a hungry Pokémon tries to take a bite? If the attacker uses a move like Seed Bomb or Bullet Seed, the apple would be blown apart, exposing the worm inside. So Applin's apple evolved to absorb those impacts. The flesh of the fruit became dense, waxy, almost rubbery against ranged attacks. Over countless generations, Applin's lineage honed this defense until it became a full ability. The result is the same as Doughblade's. Even though one is a possessed metal object and the other is a living fruit, the environment demanded projectile immunity, and the environment got it. This pattern repeats across the Bulletproof roster. Chesnaught, the original bearer, was designed by nature to be a living fortress, its back covered in spikes, its arms forming shields. Komodo, the scaly fighter, dances through battles where thrown weapons are common. Ursaluna, the massive bear, roams regions where hunters or wild Pokémon might hurl rocks and mud. Each species arrived at the same solution because each faced the same pressure: survive against attacks that come from a distance. But the deeper implication is that abilities are not fixed by genetics as rigidly as we once believed. In the Pokémon world, the environment can shape an ability more powerfully than any family tree. This repeatedly. Pokémon from volcanic areas often gain flash fire or magma armor, regardless of whether their ancestors had those traits. Water-dwelling species frequently develop swift swim or water absorb, even if they are not related to other swimmers. The ability is not a birthright, it is an adaptation. It is a conversation between a creature and its home. So when we find Doughblade and Applin sharing Bulletproof, we are not witnessing a coincidence or a whimsical game design choice. We are seeing the fingerprints of evolutionary pressure. We are seeing how a forest of apple trees can shape a ghost, and how a battlefield can shape a worm. The Pokémon world is not a place where ancestry dictates everything. It is a place where the landscape writes itself into the very souls of the creatures that inhabit it. And that truth, once understood, opens a door to a much stranger and more fascinating mystery. Because if abilities are shaped by environment, then what happens when the environment itself becomes the source of power? What if there are abilities that are not born from nature at all, but are placed inside a Pokémon by something artificial, something mechanical, something that was never meant to be alive. We have seen hints of this before in the strange behavior of certain Pokémon that seem to operate outside the rules of biology. But to understand the full story, we must look closer at the forces that are not natural, at the powers that are not inherited, at the very concept of a ghost in the machine. And that, as we will soon discover, is where the deepest secrets truly lie. The previous chapter ended with the idea of convergent evolution. How completely unrelated Pokémon, like the Applin line and the Aegislash line, ended up sharing the Bulletproof ability because of a functional need in their biology, rather than any shared ancestry. It's a concept that feels almost designed by nature itself. But what happens when the game's own internal machinery starts influencing an ability? That's where we step into the realm of the ghost in the machine. Abilities that don't just react to the battlefield, but to the very clock and hardware running the game world itself. From the earliest days of Ruby and Sapphire, a handful of abilities were built to monitor hidden counters that tick away inside the console's memory. They didn't care about type matchups or stat changes. They cared about time. Real-world time, measured by the internal clock of the Game Boy Advance. Abilities like Pickup were designed to make you aware that the game was always running, always calculating, even when you weren't battling. Pickup, in particular, became a quiet legend among players who walked miles without ever touching a controller. The Pokémon that carried it, like Meowth or Ipom, would automatically scavenge items off the ground after every battle, but the genius and the secrecy lay in the tables that determined exactly what they could find. Those tables were hidden in the game's code, and they changed depending on the level of the Pokémon. A level 10 Zigzagoon might grab a simple potion, but a level 91 would snatch a rare candy. And here's the ghostly part. The item you received was predetermined by a pseudo-random number, tied to the number of steps you had taken since the last pickup. It incentivized walking, not just as a means of getting from town to town, but as a way to manipulate the game's internal luck. The more you moved, the more the machine rewarded you. This design philosophy extended far beyond pickup. Abilities like Honey Gather encouraged you to explore every tree and bush, because a Pokémon with that skill would sometimes find honey after battle, again, governed by a hidden counter. And then there were the abilities that read the system clock itself, like those that changed with the time of day. Before Generation V introduced proper day-night cycles for battles, a handful of Pokémon had abilities that only activated during specific hours. The most famous example is the ability known as Forecast, which allowed Castform to change its type based on the weather. But that weather itself was sometimes tied to the real-world clock in certain games. There was also an ability in the early generations called Trace, which copied the opponent's ability, but its implementation had a hidden quirk. It would sometimes fail if the game's internal clock had been tampered with, as if the machine itself was aware of time travel. But perhaps the most fascinating ability to interact with hardware was one that never even appeared in battle. The ability called Runaway. At first glance, just a formality to guarantee escape from wild battles. But in the code, Runaway checked a flag that was only set when the player was in a location that could spawn encounters. It sounds trivial, yet it subtly confirmed that the game world was built on a lattice of invisible checkpoints. Every step you took, every area transition, that ability was listening to the machine's internal state. The developers intentionally layered these mechanical ghosts to make you feel like your Pokémon were aware of the world beyond their sprites. Walking was not just movement, it was a signal to the console that you were engaged, and the abilities rewarded that engagement. Pickup in particular became a staple for players who spent hours grinding levels or exploring every corner of Hoenn. The secret tables were never officially published. They were discovered by fans who ripped the ROMs open and found the weighted lists. A level 41 to 50 Linoone could find a nugget, While a level 81 to 90 could find a PP up, the odds were exact, but they were hidden, giving the ability an almost mystical reputation. It was as if the game was whispering to you, "Keep going, keep moving, and I'll give you something rare." That same design logic carried over into later generations. Generation Oi introduced the ability Honey Gather, which again hinged on step counts and random checkpoints. Generation V gave us Pickup again, but with an updated table that included evolutionary stones. And all the while, the hardware itself was being asked to do more. The Nintendo DS had a real-time clock that could be used to trigger abilities like those that changed form depending on night or day, like Lycanroc's ability in Generation 7, which only activated at a specific in-game time. But that wasn't the end of it. There were abilities that checked whether you were holding a specific item, like Klutz, which nullified held items, or Unburden, which doubled speed when an item was used. Those were less about the clock and more about inventory, but they still relied on the game's ability to track a secondary state. The ghost in the machine is not just a metaphor, it's the player's own awareness of the underlying code that makes these abilities feel alive. And as technology advanced, so did the complexity. In the modern games, abilities like Pickup have been simplified. The secret tables are now more transparent, and steps no longer affect the outcome with such precision, but the legacy remains. Every time you walk through a tall patch of grass with a Pokémon that has Pickup, remember that you're engaging with a system designed decades ago to reward exploration and movement. It's a quiet contract between you and the cartridge, and with the upcoming chapter, we'll look ahead to what the future holds. How abilities might evolve in the game set in the Kalos region, and what the return to that world in the next generation could mean for these hidden mechanics. The ghost in the machine is about to wake up again. The last chapter left us deep inside the internal clock of the Pokémon world, where the Pickup ability had been quietly tracking your playtime, your steps, even your system's battery. It was a ghost in the machine, a passive power that only existed because the game itself remembered you. But what happens when those mechanical foundations shift? When the very framework of abilities is stripped away, only to be rebuilt in a new region, with a new philosophy? That is the question we face now, as we look toward the horizon of Kalos, a region that has already taught us that some powers are meant to be temporary. You may recall that in the Legends series, abilities have been functionally absent. In Hisui, your Pokémon simply did not have them. No Levitate, no Intimidate, no Sandstream. The battles felt different, raw, more dependent on raw stats and type matchups. And now we are about to return to Kalos in Pokémon Legends ZA, a game set in the heart of Lumiose City, where Mega Evolution was once the crown jewel of battle strategy. And that brings us to the central speculation. Will abilities return in Kalos, or will they continue their absence? And if they do return, will the abilities that once belonged to Mega Evolutions reclaim their former glory? Think about it. In the original Kalos games, Mega Evolution was a temporary transformation that granted a new ability for the duration of that battle. Mega Charizard Y gained Drought, turning the sun on immediately. Mega Kangaskhan gained Parental Bond, allowing it to strike twice. Mega Blaziken gained Speed Boost, a terrifying escalation of power. These were not just stat boosts. They were signature abilities that defined the entire meta. And then in later generations, Mega Evolution was quietly shelved. Abilities like Parental Bond were nerfed, then essentially removed from competitive play. Now with Zay, the question is not just whether Mega Evolution will return, but whether those iconic abilities will return with it, and what form they might take. There is a compelling argument that abilities will return in some capacity. The Legends formula has evolved. While Legends Arceus stripped abilities entirely, it also introduced a new battle style with agile and strong moves. ZA might take a middle path. Perhaps abilities will be present but simplified or tied to items rather than automatically active. Alternatively, we could see a hybrid system where certain Pokémon, Those deeply connected to the lore of Kalos retain their original abilities, while others lose them to preserve a sense of historical authenticity. But what about the mega abilities themselves? Could a mega stone now grant an ability as a permanent trait? Or could a return to the temporary power-up, but with a new twist? Maybe a triple ability slot for the duration of the transformation. That leads us to an even bolder speculation. The potential for triple abilities, or new tiers of power in Generation X. The pattern of Pokémon mechanics often follows a generational leap every few years. Generation 6 gave us Mega Evolution and its exclusive abilities. Generation 7 introduced Z moves, which were not abilities but one-time attacks. Generation 8 brought Dynamax and Gigantamax, with no new ability layer. Generation 9 returned to simpler terrestrialization, which changes type but not ability. So what is next? It is entirely plausible that Generation X, which will almost certainly follow the Gen VVIX rhythm, could introduce a new tier of abilities. Perhaps something we are already seeing the blueprint for in ZA. Imagine a system where a Pokémon can hold a third ability slot, accessible only after meeting a certain condition. Maybe after using a specific move, or after a turn limit, or after a partner faints. This would not replace hidden abilities, but sit above them, a legendary tier of passive power. Some fans have called this trait evolution. Others have theorized about primal abilities that react to environment or weather, and with the lore of Kalos, a region built on the concept of eternal life and ultimate power. It would be the perfect place to plant the seed for such a mechanic. After all, Kalos is where the ultimate weapon was fired, where life and death were rewritten. If any region could birth a new tier of ability, it is this one. But we must also consider the possibility that abilities remain absent. The Legends series, at its heart, is about stripping away modern convenience to reveal a more ancient, raw Pokémon world. In that world, abilities might be viewed as unnatural, a modern human invention to categorize and exploit Pokémon potential. The ancient people of Kalos, who built the Lumiose Tower and worshipped the legendary Pokémon of life and destruction, may never have needed such labels. If ZA follows that logic, we could see a game where abilities are not just missing, but replaced by something else. Perhaps a system tied directly to the environment or to the bond between trainer and Pokémon, rather than a static ability slot. Yet, there is a deeper philosophical question buried in all of this speculation. What does it mean for a power to be passive? Is an ability simply a rule written into the game's code? Or is it a reflection of a Pokémon's very soul? When we remove abilities, we are not just changing battle mechanics, we are altering the identity of each species. A Pikachu without static is just a yellow mouse. A Garchomp without Sandveil loses its Desert King aura, and a Mega Evolution without its signature ability is simply a larger, shinier version of itself. The return of abilities in Kalos, if it happens, will not be a simple mechanical decision. It will be a statement about what Pokémon are and what they were meant to be, and that is where we must turn to the philosophy of the past. A concept that redefines everything we think we know about Pokémon abilities, because the true power of an ability is not in what it does during battle, but in what it reveals about the creature that carries it. And when we peel back that layer, we begin to see abilities not as tools, but as echoes of a world far older than any game mechanic. So we've been wandering through the looming questions of Kalos, wondering whether abilities will return in Legends and ZA, or remain deliberately absent, like they were in Hisui. But that question, why remove a mechanic that's been a core part of battles for over 20 years, forces us to look deeper, not just at the gameplay, but at what abilities actually mean to the identity of a Pokémon. Because abilities were never just a number on a screen. They were the first real breath of life that made these creatures feel less like sprites and more like living beings with their own quirks, instincts, and hidden natures. Think back to the very first time you encountered a wild Pokémon with an ability that caught you off guard. Maybe it was a Wobbuffet with Shadow Tag, trapping you in place and forcing you to face the truth that you couldn't just run away, or a Magikarp using Swift Swim, suddenly outspeeding your whole team in the rain, transforming a joke into a genuine threat. In that moment, you weren't just battling a collection of stats and type matchups. You were facing a creature with a personality, a special trick, a way of surviving that felt authentic. Abilities gave each species a fingerprint, a unique behavioral trait that mirrored the biology and lore of the Pokémon itself. They turned the world of Pokémon into a living ecosystem, where every encounter had a layer of unpredictability that no amount of leveling up could erase. And that's the heart of the philosophy behind the passive. Developers had to balance two very different forces: the desire to make abilities reflect the deep, mythic lore of each Pokémon, and the need for competitive fairness in a game where millions of players would eventually clash online. It's a tightrope walk. You want a Pokémon like Politoed to have Drizzle because it fits its rain dance heritage, but suddenly, you've handed a weather-setting ability to a non-legendary, and the entire competitive meta shifts. You want the Azumarill line to have huge power, because that chubby rabbit's pure physical strength is part of its charm. But then you give the same ability to Diggersby, and now the balance tilts again. Each time an ability spreads from its original signature to a new species, the lore whispers that the Pokémon's biology or behavior justifies the inclusion. But the competitive scene has to adapt, sometimes painfully. This tension between lore accuracy and competitive fairness is the engine that drives the constant refinement of abilities across generations. Some abilities remain tightly held by one line, like Wonder Guard on Shedinja, a power so extreme that giving it to anything else would break the game entirely. But others drift outward, like Magic Guard, which started as Clefable's special trick and later appeared on Reuniclus, Sigilyph, and others, each time expanding the narrative that these are creatures with an innate, almost mystical protection. The designers have to ask themselves, is it more important that a Pokémon's ability tells a truthful story about its habitat and history, or that the metagame remains diverse and exciting? And the answer is never simple. Sometimes the lore wins outright. Look at Levitate, an ability that visually and narratively makes perfect sense for floating Pokémon like Latios and Latios. The Martlet legend, birds that never touch the ground, was woven into their design from the start. But then you have something like the thread about the goofy boy who lost Levitate in a later generation, the one whose lore actually explained why it could hover. But Game Freak decided that mechanical performance outweighed flavor. That decision, controversial as it was, highlights the uncomfortable truth that abilities are not static. They evolve, they get swapped, they vanish, all in the service of a game that must stay playable. And this brings us to one of the most puzzling questions. Why are some abilities considered hidden, even when they are right in front of us? I'm talking about hidden abilities, introduced back in Generation 5 through the Dream World. These were supposed to be rare, secret, unreachable through normal gameplay. Stories whispered among trainers about a Pokémon that could do something impossible, but over time the term hidden started to feel like a fiction we all accepted. We know where to find them now. We can read them on Bulbapedia. We can use ability patches to force them onto any Pokémon we own. So why do we still call them hidden? The answer lies in the philosophy itself. The idea that a Pokémon's deepest, most authentic nature should feel like a discovery, not a given. Hidden abilities aren't hidden from our knowledge. They're hidden from our first impression. They represent the unknown side of a creature, the potential that only emerges under rare conditions or through dedicated effort. When you finally catch that Dreamworld Politoed with Drizzle back in 2011, or hunt down a Safari Zone Pokémon with its hidden power in a modern game, you're participating in a ritual that makes the Pokémon feel more real, more complex, more alive. The hidden ability isn't about secrecy, it's about depth. And that depth is exactly why abilities, even when removed in spin-off titles like Legends Arceus, leave a hollow space. They were the mechanic that allowed Pokémon to express themselves without needing a new move or a new evolution. A Pokémon's ability was its personality trait, its little behavioral quirk, the thing that made you remember it as something more than a sprite on a battlefield. Without abilities, Pokémon become slightly less magical, slightly more like programmed assets. The philosophy of the passive is, in the end, a philosophy of life, of giving each creature a quiet, constant presence in the world, a way of being that transcends the turn-based combat. As we look ahead to Kalos and whatever Legend Z might hold, the question lingers. Will a return of this philosophy, or will the absence continue? And if abilities do come back, what new secrets will they carry? Perhaps the biggest secret of all is still waiting to be uncovered, hidden in plain sight, right under our noses. That story, the one that ties every thread together, is the one I want to tell you next. Up next is Chapter 28, The Final Secret, and I promise you, it will change the way you see everything we've talked about so far. So we've spent the last chapter reflecting on how abilities gave Pokémon a pulse, a personality that transcended just numbers on a screen. That idea, that a creature's passive trait is what makes it feel alive, is really the heart of what we've been unpacking across all 27 chapters. But if you've been listening closely, you might have noticed something strange. But we never actually sat down and asked the most fundamental question of all. What is the common thread that binds every single one of those 400 plus abilities together? Not the mechanics, not the lore, but the essential nature of what an ability even is. Because when you look at them from a distance, abilities seem like a chaotic zoo. Some let a Pokémon heal in the sun, others let it ignore enemy attacks, and a few are so niche you'd be forgiven for forgetting they exist. But beneath that surface noise, there is a single quiet principle that ties every ability to every Pokémon that carries it. And that principle isn't just a gameplay mechanic. It's the franchise's deepest secret, the thing that saved Pokémon from becoming a stale, number-crunching RPG. Let's step back for a moment. Before Generation 3, a Pokémon's identity was almost entirely defined by its typing, its move pool, and its stats. Two Pokémon of the same species were essentially identical. The only variation came from the randomness of IVs and EVs, invisible numbers that most players never even understood. Growth, if you've had it, was just a move you could teach to any grass type. There was no way for a Pokémon to feel truly unique, to have a trait that made it stand out from the crowd of its own kind. Then came Ruby and Sapphire, and with them, abilities. At first they were simple. Fire types get Flash Fire, water types get Water Veil, normal types get Runaway. But even those earliest abilities did something profound. They turned each Pokémon into a puzzle, a set of rules that changed how you interacted with it. A Pikachu with Static wasn't just a Pikachu that knew Thunderbolt. It was a Pikachu that punished physical contact. An Absol with Pressure wasn't just a disaster Pokémon. It was a creature that drained your resources just by existing. Abilities gave every encounter a new layer of decision-making. And more importantly, they gave every species a signature invisible in the Pokédex, but felt in battle. As generations rolled on, that power only grew denser. By the time we reached Generation 5, abilities like Drought and Drizzle had been democratized, passed from legendaries to ordinary Pokémon like Ninetales and Politoed. That was a shock the first time you saw a simple fox setting the sun like a primal god, but it also hinted at something deeper. Abilities are not just traits that Pokémon have. They are the very expression of what that Pokémon is. They are the fire in a fire type's core, the lightning in an electric type's nerves. And when the game designers decided to give a non-legendary the power to change the weather, they were making a statement about the environment. Weather is not the exclusive domain of gods. It can spring from a fox that has lived in the desert for centuries, or a duck that breathes in ocean spray. That idea leads us to the ultimate revelation. Abilities are not just a layer on top of the Pokémon formula. They are the true DNA of the Pokémon franchise. Not the genetic code, but the spiritual one. Think about it. In real life, DNA encodes the subtle differences that make each living thing unique. The way a dog breeds for scent, a cat for stealth, a bird for flight. Abilities do the exact same thing for Pokémon. They encode the niche, the behavior, the unconscious power that defines a species. A Sableye has Prankster because it's a trickster. A Gardevoir has Trace because it can read minds. A Magikarp has Swift Swim because even the most pathetic fish knows how to flee from danger. Every ability is a snippet of that Pokémon story, written in the language of gameplay. This is why abilities saved the series from stagnation, because stats and types alone could only carry so many monsters. Once you've seen one water type, you've seen them all, until one of them has the power to summon rain that never ends, and another has an ability that turns its scaly hide into a defensive shield, and a third has a hidden ability that makes its water moves hit with the force of a tsunami. Abilities made each Pokémon a living puzzle box, a new rule to learn. They gave the developers endless room to create new mechanics without needing to invent new types or rebalance the entire combat system. And they gave players the joy of discovery, the thrill of finding a Pokémon with an ability you never knew existed, and realizing it changes everything. We've traveled through every generation, through lost powers, through forgotten abilities that were removed from certain species, through the secret tables of Pickup and the ancient worship of Melmetal. All of those stories were leading to this single truth. The mechanic that was introduced as a simple tweak to make Pokémon feel more real ended up becoming the very fabric that holds the franchise together. If you're lying in bed right now, maybe drifting off, let that thought settle. The next time you see a Pikachu in the wild, or hatch a Charmander, or evolve a Magikarp into a Gyarados, remember that its true identity isn't in its type chart. It's in that small, almost invisible box on its summary screen that lists its ability. That's the signature of its soul. And that soul is what made Pokémon a world you could believe in. We started this journey to explore the hidden secrets of every Pokémon ability. And tonight, we finally found the one secret that ties them all together. Abilities are the language the Pokémon world uses to tell you who these creatures really are, not just in battle, but in the quiet spaces between battles, in the overworld, in the lore, in every fibre of the game. So as you close your eyes, know that you've seen the final secret, the mechanic that saved a series from becoming a numbers game, turned those numbers into stories, and the stories will keep evolving, just like the abilities themselves. For now, rest easy, the mystery is solved. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.